So, Julia and I are both women in our early 20s, and we were out camping in a remote area of Montana that isn't super popular, but it's fairly popular amongst locals who camp a lot like we do. Which meant that it wasn't super unusual when we saw a group of 3 guys who looked to be a little bit older than us drive past our camp about an hour and a half after we set up our chairs and table. We just assumed that they were searching for a good spot to camp too. But then, when the car was still in our sight through the trees, we saw it turn around, and as it was driving back, we both noticed one of the guys sticking his phone out the window and seemed to be recording us. Both of us thought that it was really weird, and I walked a bit closer to take a picture of their license plate as a bit of a safety measure. But when I got closer, I saw that the back plate had all the numbers covered with black paint. Julia and I both got bad vibes from this, but both of us are aware that men are creeps towards women all the time, and both of us are prepared with bear spray because Montana is grizzly bear country. So we decided that it wasn't a weird enough interaction to pack our stuff up and find a different spot. Instead, we just decided to put up an empty tent outside and sleep in my car instead to trick people into thinking that we were sleeping in the tent if they tried to attack us. So, later that night, when both of us were sleeping in my car, we heard branches rustling and snapping outside by the empty tent, despite the fact that it wasn't windy. Originally, we assumed it was a bear trying to climb up to the bear hang with our food and scented hygiene products. But then, we heard male voices outside, and I lifted my head up to the window and saw the same car that passed us earlier. I got off the air mattress on top of the back row of seats that we put down to make an area for us to sleep, and locked the doors individually so my car wouldn't make a beeping noise. Julia and I stayed still and hoped that the men would leave. For a while we heard them talking, but it was hard to make out what they said from inside the car, obviously. But eventually we heard more rustling and branches snapping, which made us think that they were trying to steal something from the bear hang, which was weird, but neither of us wanted to actually look out the window in case one of them spotted us. Eventually we heard the car leave, which was a huge relief, but we were too freaked out to actually leave the car until it was light outside and campers nearby would be waking up. When I got out though, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Above our tent, the men had hung a dead deer that was obviously killed recently because it was leaking blood everywhere on top of our tent. The internal organs were ripped out and its limbs were cut off and laid out in a circle around the tent. This is obviously messed up on its own, but hunting permits aren't even being sold right now, which means that the deer was killed illegally to do whatever it is that those guys did. As soon as we processed what we were looking at, Julia and I freaked out and drove away without taking down our camp. Once we were in a service area, Julia called the police and Forest Service to report what had happened while I drove home. The Forest Service was nice enough to get our stuff for us, but honestly, I don't even want mine back in case that there's some weird curse on it or something. The police are looking into it to charge a fine for killing wild game during the off-season, but as far as I know, what they did to us technically isn't illegal. It's just really, really creepy. I haven't heard of anything like this before, but if you have, then please do let me know. I'm very curious and sort of very spooked at the same time, and I love camping so much, but after this, I just don't know if I can camp for, a long time. So I've got a hobby carpentry shop, furniture, bows, canoes, etc. I don't know, it keeps me out of the bar, but a local guy at my shotgun range has a furniture restoration business too. We got to talking one day and he said that he had decades of abandoned material, stuff where people dropped it off and decided it wasn't worth paying to chemically strip and refinish, sort of thing. Basically, Buddy has heaps of milled hardwood taking up space and he would be happy to give it to me for free. He's a bit of a weird guy, I'll admit. Sort of quiet and just had a keep-to-himself thing going on mostly. He didn't typically do small talk, but occasionally he restored some people's gun stocks, so he was known about the place. The materials, they are not cheap when you're just being a hobby sort of guy, and I don't mind re-milling stuff at all, so I go down to the shop, and first thing that I noticed is that he and his co-worker, there were no projects on the go in his shop, were visibly upset that I brought some buddies to help me. I also noticed that the front office or lobby is a cramped affair full of taxidermy, which isn't too much of a red flag, I suppose. I mean, I met this guy at a gun range after all. But once you go into the back, there was a lot of stuff that progressively made my eyebrows go a little further up my face. Buddy does chemical stripping of furniture, so he's got several chemical vats or buckets that you can fit a full-size couch into. I know what stripping chemicals smells like. Smells like blue, if anyone's wondering, but there was definitely another smell to the room. Sort of rank and musty. Big chains from the ceiling, which I guess could be for picking up the furniture pieces. All this material that he's got for me is in a mezzanine, so up I go for some good old-fashioned garbage pile diving. There's 2 major rooms in the mezzanine. One is full of his materials that he's giving me, just dozens of old hardwood tables and chairs, etc. In fact, I got some really nice old oak pews for my trouble. Hundreds of board feet of old 2-inch thick oak, which was a real score. The other room, though, was maybe, I don't know, a showroom? But this showroom, it clearly hadn't been touched in years and had some pretty interesting things going on in it. Like, there was a rocking chair covered in dust, an empty wire bird cage that could have been 100 years old, and a large bookcase packed full of Christian books. No carpentry or furniture books anywhere. It had several picture frames with what could have been family photos, lots of young or smiling children, which just gave a little bit of a creepy movie vibe to it, I guess. But the real clincher was that I noticed footprints in the dust that walked into the wall behind the showroom door, and behind the door to the showroom was a door that had been cut into the drywall and was heavily padlocked from the outside. The showroom side, that is. So basically, you couldn't see this door cut into the wall when you were in the showroom while the showroom door was open, unless you were quite close to the wall, because if you were in the showroom, the door covered this wall portal. I also learned out on my way out that day that this guy doesn't have a smartphone either. Instead, he's got a no GPS phone, a creepy-looking dusty grandmother's suit full of heavily religious literature, and a secret room in the wall locked from the outside, and massive chemical vats in his workshop that smell a little bit organic, and was really grumpy that I didn't show up alone. He did still let me loot his garbage pile though, which I was thankful for, but still. I scored big that day, I'll admit. Probably took home enough stuff to mill into about 7 or 10k worth of hardwood boards, but I was really, really glad that I went there with 2 other people to help me load material that day. We made Buffalo Bill jokes the whole way home, and I haven't seen him since. He hasn't been to the range in 2 years now, which is sort of odd too, but I don't know. Something was off about that place and that guy, and I'll never go back there. I would like to preface this by stating that the following is not creative writing by any means. This is a story that I was originally told, secondhand, by my mother, but confirmed by my grandfather when I was about maybe 14 to 15. I leave it to you to form your own opinion, obviously, or to debunk it or whatever. Regardless, this story has always stuck with me my whole life. So, a bit of background. My grandfather passed away back in 2013 from cancer, but in his lifetime, he was a decent guy who helped a lot of people in various ways. After he met my grandmother, they both joined the army and they served in Japanese-based US Army hospitals during the Vietnam conflict, helping to save a lot of people. After his time with the Army, he also joined the Air Force for a stint. This all helped him to get his nursing degree and became an anesthetician. After the Air Force, he became a clergyman at their church, and years later, he would become a Russian Orthodox priest. For over 40 years, he served as a priest too, and by the way, just for reference, in most sects of Orthodox Christianity, they allow clergy to marry unless they were a bishop or higher. My grandfather, though, was the sort of priest that the archdiocese would call up and say, "Father, we have these people in Alabama, they're believers, but they have no church in like 100 miles that they can attend. Will you go there and help organize something?" Then what would start as people holding liturgy in somebody else's living room with like 24 people would become a full-on church eventually. He repeated that more times than I've ever gotten a straight answer on, by the way. The only thing that I thought that he was not so great for was always putting the church before his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, it was the mid-70s, and my grandfather had moved my mum, my aunt, and my grandmother to New Jersey to help one of these struggling churches that were without a priest. My mum, she was about 5 or 6 at that time, and she remembers this point in time pretty well too. One day, my grandfather was contacted by his bishop, who told him that his assistance was needed with something very serious. He told my grandfather that there is this young girl, 17 years old. She's a gypsy, and her family brought her to the monastery claiming that she was apparently possessed. The monks there tell me that they believe this to be serious too. Will you go there to help them? Now, my grandfather had been a priest for several years by that point, but understand that most priests who serve their entire lives are never asked to help exorcise a demon. Actually, the Roman Catholics require special permission from the Vatican to perform any exorcism rites, but he agreed without knowing what he was walking into. The story that I was told about the girl was that her name was Juliana and her family were gypsies or travelers. She had come from a family that was heavily involved in occult practices, which shouldn't surprise anyone familiar with that culture. But Juliana was married to a man from another family in their clan. I don't know much about him besides that he was a bit older than her, and he also practiced a lot of magic. Juliana's family started becoming concerned when she started acting different. She was very moody, aggressive, wrathful in fact, and just straight up mean. As time went on, her fits would get worse, and she would scream hurtful things at people for being asked simple things. But the family was terrified when the caravan that they lived in would rattle, rise up off the ground a few feet, and drop to the ground, and even on many occasions seeing things fly off the wall or out of cupboards and break against the wall. They obviously tried their own rites and rituals to cleanse whatever darkness they believed was possessing Juliana, but nothing had worked. So that's when they turned to this monastery, desperately seeking help. And this is where Grandpa gets involved. He said that when he got there, everyone was in the church. Another priest and a handful of monks, all preparing holy water, oils, saying prayers for help with God's strength. In the back of the church were several curious lay people that live and help work on the monastery grounds. And then there were a bunch of Juliana's family. I guess they had her in room with a few family members until they were ready. But they bring her in, sit her on a chair in front of the altar. And this is where my grandfather said that he felt the air get thicker, and she seemed really ticked off and was just sort of talking nothing, laughing and spitting, trying to scratch and kick. They had a few people restraining her as she started getting violent. They semi-surround her and they began praying and performing the full-on exorcism rite. As they progressed, she began growling, and this was when he said that things started happening. The chairs in the church, they began rattling and shaking, then moving on their own before levitating off of the floor. Those curious people, and even some of Juliana's family, were so scared that they ran out of the church. He said that they continued praying and repeating the prayers over and over for several hours as things continued to erratically move on their own, and Juliana continued to curse them and their god, spit and scratch and target each person, and try to get into their head and break their concentration. But they continued praying and asking God and every saint that they could think of to help them banish this thing back to where it had come from and to leave this girl alone. Then, she suddenly sat back rigidly and swung her head back. Then her face began to contort and take on this inhuman shape while her mouth opened wider than a human's mouth could really expand, without completely separating the jawbone, that is. And then a voice came from within her, and in this deep, growly, sort of loud demonic voice said, "Leave me alone, I'm happy with her." But this voice, it didn't speak in English or in any other commonly spoken language. It spoke in a bit of a dead language that is native to the region of Romania and the steppes of Russia. It was a Slavic language. The monks knew this language though, because many old church manuscripts are written in this nearly ancient language. This moment though, it frightened everyone in the room, but they knew that they couldn't stop now. Not long after though, Juliana, she passed out. She was unconscious and they couldn't wake her for a moment. She was breathing, but she was definitely in rough shape. So they brought her to the hospital at this point, and she was stable but wouldn't wake up. And then she was under for about 2 weeks. She woke up one day, and she was really confused. She didn't understand why she was in the hospital. She had no memory of the exorcism at all. In fact, she couldn't remember the last year and a half of her life. The very last thing that she could remember was being in her trailer. She said, "I was sitting at the table while my husband slept in our bed when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. I turned and I see my husband sleeping on his back, but there was this black cloud that was flowing out of his mouth and hovering above him in bed. And before I could scream, this black cloud rushed at me and, well, now I'm here." I think my grandfather was changed forever after that night. My mum tells me that she was 7 or so at the time, and she remembers that her father didn't speak for at least a couple of weeks, and he wore this sort of somber look on his face. He would move on eventually, but it definitely had a lasting impression. My mum says that he didn't tell her the story until she was a teenager, and he was trying to warn her off of dabbling in the occult, as you never know what you're inviting in. My grandfather, he wasn't the kind of guy that liked to make up stories at all. Actually, he liked to call people out for embellishment a lot. He usually didn't have a lot to say too, unless you asked him about something. He was a very intelligent man though, and read a lot. He also traveled across the US and had been to various countries over his lifetime. He served in 2 branches of the military and had a career as a medical professional. And I'd say that he has some level of credibility at least. In spite of the fact too that I come from a religious family and growing up I went to church pretty regularly, I am not a religious person by any means. I've studied a good number of various belief systems and I don't subscribe to any single one. So this isn't like a Christian rant or trash-talking gypsies or whatever. I actually have a lot of respect for their heritage, but I just wanted to share a paranormal story that would never be heard if it wasn't for this platform. And so I now hand it over to you guys for any comments, questions, opinions, theories, and also any well thought out jokes. In 1982, I and 6 buddies went bear hunting in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We stayed at cabins near Twin Lakes at the base of the Keweenaw Peninsula. Now, when you hunt most critters, you go out before dawn and sit until an hour or 2 after the sun comes up, and late afternoon until dark. Most bigger game animals hunker down during the daylight hours, so it doesn't pay to sit there all day. And this means that you have a lot of time between hunts. Now, this part of the Upper Peninsula has some remote areas. It is also where a lot of copper mining went on in the old days. The mines are all closed now, obviously, and mostly full of water, but there are a lot of big paper mill holdings there also that are still being logged. So there's a lot of logging roads built up by the paper mills. They are good enough roads for large double trailer log trucks filled with many tons of logs to travel on. One thing that you learn quickly when you use these roads is to get the heck off the road when a truck is coming down, because they take up the whole road, and they don't even slow down for civilians because the mill owns the roads, not the state or the county, and you're on their land technically. But as long as you don't get in their way, then they don't care. Most of the bridges across streams or rivers just consist of huge piles of large rocks with smaller gravel on top of the road. These things look like dams, to be honest, but because of the large bottom rocks, the water can flow through the bridge. Genuinely, it's a pretty cool thing to see. We spend a lot of time driving and exploring those logging roads too. On one particular day, we went down a new road that led to an actual state park at the bottom of Misery Bay on Lake Superior. It's a park maintained by the state on paper mill property. There are several very rustic sort of campsites at the park, and we spent most of the time at the park and just messing around on the beach, really. At about noon, we headed back down a different road. It's around this time, too, that you see a lot of small shacks that usually have smoke coming out of the chimneys. They're apparently used by the loggers, I think. We eventually ended up way out in the wilderness with no signs of logging or logging trucks anywhere. It's a bit like driving in a tunnel, in fact, because the trees come together over the road here. But after a long while, we came into a clear area, and then around a bend, we came upon what we thought was a small town. The road basically went right down a main street, and as we drove through the place, it became apparent that there were no people to be seen. We came to a building that was kind of a store, I guess, so we stopped there. The store was completely empty. Looking in the dusty windows, you could see that it had been empty for a long time. We walked around the main street, checking out the houses. A lot of them were in pretty good repair, but they were completely deserted. Dust on the floors had been undisturbed for many years, and there were no signs of foot traffic anywhere. We eventually got back into the trucks and moved on. We were all pretty intrigued by the town, but we didn't go into any of the houses because, well, it just sort of looked like the owners might actually come back at any point. The main street, it went up a pretty big hill, and at the top of the hill was a large building that was obviously some kind of industrial use building, covered in that old sort of galvanized corrugated metal sheeting. We stopped at the building and found an opening in the siding. The inside of the building was wide open, and it was very tall, like 30 to 40 feet tall, with a lot of supporting steelwork. Everything was pretty rusty and obviously hadn't been touched in many years. There were large windows with no glass, just sort of open to the outside, high up in the walls that allowed the sun to light it up pretty well inside. At the center of the place, there was a large hole in the floor though, like 15 to 20 feet square. We peered down into the opening, and it was a really deep and dark hole. Somebody dropped a stone down the hole, and it was a long time before you could hear a faint splash of water. So we dropped another stone, and we had a couple of those old Casio watches with a stopwatch function, so we dropped the rock and timed it to the splash. And it took almost exactly 10 seconds. There were no guardrails, mind you, or safety measures of any kind here, and it was pretty scary thinking about falling into that deep black hole. There was also some old equipment left there that looked to be like turn-of-the-century type stuff. We assumed it was a closed copper mine, but the whole time we were exploring, we had two 35mm film cameras taking a lot of pictures. This was 30 years before cell phones and 35 to 40 before smartphones. After exploring the place for a while, we decided that it was time to get going because we only had a few hours before dark. Now, after miles of running down those unmarked roads, we eventually made it back to the cabins. We all went to our hunting spots, and after it got dark, we all headed back to the local bar where we usually went to get something to eat. One of the guys asked the lady bartender if she knew anything about that shutdown mine and abandoned town, and she got a kind of funny look on her face and went to the kitchen pass-through window and said, "Hey Dave, these guys went and visited Peterson." We all looked at each other like, what the heck is she talking about? The kitchen door opened up, and then a cook apparently called Dave came out, dressed in typical bar cook clothes. Dave came over and said, "What did you see in Peterson?" We said, first of all, we never saw a sign with a name on it, but it was just an abandoned town and pretty decent looking buildings, and a closed down copper mine up on the hill. Dave then said, yep, that's Peterson. Some people see signs going into town and some don't. The thing is that there never was a Peterson. It never existed. We were like, what are you talking about? I mean, we were there, looked into the buildings, dropped rocks down the empty mine shaft, and even took many pictures. Dave then said, yep, you and many other people, but if you try to return, I guarantee you won't find it. We were like, what? We know the road that we took. We could get back there easily, man. And he said, go ahead and try. You won't find it. Dave also asked if we by any chance dropped a rock in the hole and timed it to the bottom. And yes, actually we did, and it took almost exactly 10 seconds like we said. Dave then said, I did too, and I looked it up. A falling rock, or anything really, falls about 400 feet in 10 seconds. He then said that Peterson is a real ghost town. The whole place is a real ghost town, he said. He said that he was there and saw the same things years ago. Apparently, he'd tried many times to go back and he'd never been able to find it. Him and a lot of other people who lived in this area and know it like the backs of their hands have seen it once and once only, never being able to find it again. Dave said to go to Houghton Hancock and to get our film developed and to let him see the pictures. So the next day we decided to take off from hunting and go up to town and get the film developed. Hancock is home to Michigan Tech, so it's a college town with all the amenities, and it had a quick film developer place, so we dropped the film off and went to see the sights. It's a really picturesque place too, and I highly recommend you go and check it out if you ever get the chance. Anyway, about an hour northeast of Hancock is Copper Harbor at the very top of Michigan, where it ends into Lake Superior. It's a really cool place, and when we got back to Hancock, we were dying to see the pictures, so we went and got the film and tore open the envelopes. There were a lot of pictures, beautiful pictures, but weirdly, not a single picture of Peterson. We were thinking, hold up, wait a minute, this isn't possible. So a couple of guys went back to the film place and asked where the other pictures that were on those rolls were. But in the end, there were no other pictures. We had all the negatives. They don't keep other people's pictures apparently, and they see thousands every month. Now, there's a park in town, and we stopped there and all sat at that table just kind of in shock, really, not saying much for quite a while. In 1982, I was 23 years old, and at 23, you think you know it all, but when you're hit square in the face by something like that, it shook me to the core. Everything that you think you know is now suspect because, we were in that abandoned town. It was just a cool old abandoned town. I saw it with my own eyes in the wide open sunny broad daylight, not on some dark foggy creepy night. Nothing creepy happened, but we took those pictures. Pictures that apparently don't exist. All that changed my life from that point forward. After that, we went back to see Dave and gave him the stack of pictures of the woods. The Big Mac Bridge, Misery Bay, the park on the bay, logging trucks, the rock bridges, some of the shacks, one of which was just about 2 miles from Peterson. Dave just kind of chuckled and said, yep, that's our Peterson all right. For the next 2 days, we totally forgot about hunting. We split up into 2 trucks and we drove those roads over and over and over again. And we never refound Peterson. Years ago, I was in rehab for drug addiction. I did 5 months in rehab, then 6 months of sober living following that. This occurred the last few weeks of being in rehab before going to sober living. Now, I met hundreds of addicts, In fact, new people would come and go on a daily basis. A lot of these people were much worse off than others, and everyone was in for different things. A lot of these people that came in also had a plethora of mental health issues and mental illnesses. Severe depression, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and many others. But I'll never forget the day that Mike, a 30 to 40-year-old male, was admitted. A lot of the techs that worked at the rehab informed all of the patients about Mike and his condition. He had a case of severe schizophrenia and would constantly be talking to no one. He would get really agitated and upset at times at these voices, and would often yell and have a panic attack. It was very sad, to be honest, and it wasn't like this would happen sometimes. This was ongoing, like a 24/7 problem that, unfortunately, Mike had to deal with. The rehab was situated in an old motel-like complex, except it was much, much nicer, like a fancy hotel. Girls across the street in identical buildings. Everyone was assigned to a specific room with 2 to 3 other patients, and when Mike showed up, he was placed in the unit that I was in. I introduced myself to him and shook his hand. He seemed so timid and nervous, but I gave a rundown of how things work and a rough daily schedule for our program. I showed him his room, and I told him not to hesitate to ask me for anything. Before I walked away, I told him, "Mike, we're all in here for our own reasons. I just want you to know that there's no judgment whatsoever on my end, and that no matter what you may be dealing with, you can come to me and confide in me for anything you like, man." He partially grinned at that and nodded at me. And that was the last time that we spoke for the 2 weeks that he was there. Now, that evening, I was watching TV in the living room of our unit when I heard him start aggressively talking to himself. The strange thing is that it literally sounded like he was having a legit conversation. I heard him say, "Don't say that, shut up." And then 5 seconds later he said, "I'm not going to do that, leave me alone." And then a few seconds after that, "Get out of here." This was expected because I was informed of his condition, but hearing him have an episode the first time made me feel, well, really bad for him. But then, things took a very odd turn over the following days. A few days after Mike was placed in my unit, I woke up one morning to go make some coffee. I was in the kitchen, and Mike's room was down the hallway. I was pulling out a coffee filter when I heard clear as day, "What are you doing?" I turned around expecting to see Mike, but no one was there. Then I hear Mike all the way from the room scream, "Ah, get out of here!" I was very, very confused and didn't know what to make of it, and kind of just shrugged it off. I was pretty alarmed by this, though, but things kept happening. It was later in the week when I was in the living room watching TV again when I heard Mike having another conversation with himself, but this time I could distinctly hear a second voice. I thought to myself, does he have a split personality and is having a conversation between himself and his other self? The other voice was so much different, and I kept telling myself, Mike's just really, really good at imitating other voices or something. I turned the volume down on the TV so that I could hear more of this conversation. Mike says, "I told you no, I'm not going to do that. Leave me alone, please." The other voice responds, "Just go and do what I tell you. It's for the best." Mike responds, "No, that's bad, I won't do it." The other voice then responds, "Go to the kitchen and get the knife, now." Then Mike let out a huge scream of despair. I sat there on that couch in just disbelief. My brain couldn't comprehend what I was hearing or what was happening. I suddenly got a huge sense of dread that came over me. I got up and started making my way to his door to check on him, and as I got closer, the conversation was becoming much more audible and clear to hear. There were 2 people in that room. I was certain of it, and nothing is ever going to change my mind about that. As I heard the other voice trying to persuade Mike again, I knocked on his door and the voice stopped immediately. I opened the door to tell Mike that I heard him scream and wanted to see if he was okay. It was just him sitting on the chair with his head in his hands like he just got some really bad news. He looked up at me and said, "I'm fine, thanks. Please shut the door." I immediately went to our head nurse and explained to her that Mike was saying some pretty scary things and that I was in fear of my life being in the same room as him. I mentioned to her hearing him talk to himself about a knife, and that was all it took for them to take Mike and relocate to somewhere else where he could get the help that he needed. To this day, I think about this experience that I had with Mike and try to find a reasonable explanation for what happened and what I heard. I've never heard voices or had hallucinations at any other point. I've been clean of drugs for years now, but this was just an experience that I had that has made me question reality and everything. Honestly, I feel like he didn't have schizophrenia, but that maybe he was possessed. I think about this often and I still cannot come to terms with it. I guess I want closure about it, and it's just something that I'll probably never get. So, that's my story, and if you've listened to everything, well then, thanks. This is probably the weirdest paranormal or unexplainable experience that I've had. Other than feeling someone poke their finger in my back when laying on my side in the bed, this one pretty much tops it. I work swing shifts, so when I get home from work, everyone is usually asleep. I usually watch some TV to unwind before going to bed, and because of that, I always make sure the bedroom doors are closed so I don't wake up my wife and kids. Now, when I got home one evening, I noticed the master bedroom door was closed but not latched, so I figured that should be fine. But a few minutes later, I hear psst coming from the master bedroom. I look, and now the door is ajar enough to stick your head out. I figured the wife is feeling frisky, so I jump up and walk into the bedroom. But she is in bed covered up, and I'm thinking, she's pretending to be asleep. I climb in bed and tell her to stop playing. She wakes up though, and I could tell that she wasn't pretending. We've been married a long time now, so I know how she is when she wakes up. Long story short, I explained to her what happened, and she's weirded out like I was. Genuinely, it made my skin crawl, and it was hard to fall asleep that night. Ever since that night, I randomly feel something around me too, like the hair on my neck will stand up. I feel like I'm being watched. I was your typical kid growing up in a lower to middle class household. We had a decent older house in the suburbs, and Mum and Dad were always working. This was the 80s, so my brother and I were often home alone or over at a friend's house. Our parents, they were pretty negligent in many ways, but this is also sort of how things just were back then. Now, I remember knowing something was deeply, deeply wrong with our home as early as I could form memories or sense the world around me. I was afraid of ghosts and monsters under the bed or in my closet like every other kid. You know, things that obviously weren't real and just some primal monkey brain remnant that kids work through as they get older. But there was a distinct difference between these imagined monsters and the very real ones that I would encounter over the next few years. My mother's father was still alive when this all started. He bought me a blue and white fighter jet, which I hung from the ceiling in my bedroom, above my bed. Sometimes, wind would come in through the window and turn it a few spins counterclockwise. Then it would spin clockwise and come back to rest and be still. I remember observing just how it would eventually come to rest. It never spun much, but I like to imagine it screaming through the sky and sort of pew-pewing all over the place. Shortly after I installed this thing, I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. I wasn't scared or startled or really awake for any reason. I would stare up at the ceiling trying to go back to sleep. Every once in a while, the jet would spin and spin and spin faster and faster until it was a blur, all in the same direction. The first time it happened, I thought that it was really weird. By the fifth or sixth time, this became genuinely a terrifying event. Other times it would be spinning at warp speed and suddenly just stop abruptly, as if someone had grabbed it and held it in place. I have a memory of running out of my room screaming and crying over this. Grandpa, he died the next year. That jet meant more to me than it did before, obviously. I cherished this little treasure, but it was terrorizing me. And eventually, I just had to get rid of it. I was in first grade and walking to and from school with my friends. I had a house key, which wasn't unusual at the time. Downstairs, we had a living room with a TV and a couch. I remember coming home one of these days to watch cartoons. On my left side, there were slotted folding doors that hid the clothes washer and dryer. They always spooked me out for some reason, like there was someone in there sometimes sitting there just watching me. I never saw anyone or heard anything, but I could just never shake that feeling. In fact, I would often run by them. They were a source of fear for me, but I was already taking my own clothes out and putting them away, so it wasn't alien or unusual. It just very often felt like someone was behind there, just sort of watching me. I think I was actually watching Pinwheel or something similar on TV, maybe Lamb Chop, I don't know, but I remember sitting there once and the left door folded open abruptly, like someone tied a rope to it and a car outside and the car just suddenly took off. They weren't on wheels or anything, so this scared the daylights out of me. I cried to my parents about it. I was being a baby apparently, and it was nothing though. Until it wasn't. You see, one day I was sitting there and it opened and shut like this, over and over, just slamming. I wanted to run by to get out, but it wasn't safe because something kept slamming it open and slamming it shut. I almost want to say I heard laughter, but I don't know, I don't think I did. I was being terrorized though, and it stopped, and as I ran by it, it started up again, and it scared me half to death. I slammed the door behind me and instantly just ran upstairs. Things calmed down for a few months after that. I was in the second grade, Mrs. Tubman's homeroom. I'm a big boy now, and I don't get scared or pee in the bed over ghosts that aren't real anymore. I'm helping my older brother with yard work and delivering papers now. I'm quickly becoming fiercely independent at a young age. I get my own key and start walking home alone from school even. Now, we had a Raggedy Ann doll that sat on a rocking chair in one of the adjacent bedrooms. It always creeped me out, especially because it used to be in the attic where I'd see it every time that we'd got Christmas ornaments out. For some reason too, my parents, they brought it down and set it downstairs on this rocking chair. I came home one day to watch cartoons, and as I go to reach for the handle leading to the basement, the doorknob suddenly spins. Someone is on the other side holding it closed. Naturally, it must be my brother. He got out earlier than me, of course, and he was playing a trick. I tried opening the door, but it just wouldn't budge. It was unlocked or the knob wouldn't turn, so I pushed my shoulder into it because I knew I was stronger than him, but it still didn't open. I moved back to get some speed behind me and go to shoulder it again, but the door slowly opens as I'm about to hit it. In fact, I fly through the open door and stumble into the room with that doll sitting there instead. And to my abject horror, the rocking chair is moving back and forth. The doll is just a doll, obviously, but it was as if a person was sitting there. I scream, run out, and I make it halfway up the stairs. I'm losing my mind. I mean, this can't be real. And in the end, my parents told me that it wasn't real, and they made me go to the school counselor and coach me to swear that it wasn't real, that I was brave. I deliver newspapers and I do yard work. I'm a big boy, so it can't be real. I go back down eventually and peek my head around the corner. The doll is now sitting there facing me with its back against the arm, and the chair is still rocking at the same mathematical, rhythmic, and predictable speed. It's just the wind, though, I say. My parents had told me this. But when I look at the windows, they were closed. At this, I completely lose it. I run out, make it up half of the stairs to the front door landing. I got up the other half of the stairs to the kitchen. I look around, but there's nothing. No one is home. It's just me, and I'm just freaking out. Mum convinced me that I made these up and none of this was real. I try to pull myself together. We can't afford for them to come home early from work, so I come down, get my head straight, and pour myself a glass of water. And that was when I hear the bang. 2 bangs, 3, 4, and 5. It is the unmistakable sound of the attic door. You pull a cord and the stairs fall out and down and you climb up the hole in the ceiling. Except you can slightly pull it to a certain length and let the cord go and it will still slam. I know, too, exactly what it is and why it is making that noise, but I just cannot believe it. So I peek my head around the corner and I see the rope is taut. It's straight down to the floor like someone is pulling it. It wasn't swaying or dangling as the attic opens and slams. There's something invisible there pulling it and doing this on purpose. I completely lose my mind over this and I run to the neighbor's house. I tell them Mum and Dad come home early. I get in trouble. I have to see another school counselor. Tim, I think, this time, but he had soft curly black hair and he's pleasant enough, but my parents tell me to tell him that it's not real. I refuse, though. I see a Dr. Glickstein at some fancy office downtown. I tell him everything that I've told you guys up to this point. I have to see him a few more times. Eventually, my mother convinces him, though, that I'm just making up stories. The terror campaigns, though, they continue for another whole year. It is mischievous, evil, persistent little things that crescendo into big things that become aggressive and threatening, like it was messing with me. I'm 7 now, and one day I get really sick, like very sick. So sick another family member has to come over and watch me. I'm laying in bed with a window fan in, and I'm on the cusp of sleeping. I'm praying to God and asking Grandpa for help, and I just can't do this anymore. When I see a little golden tornado-looking thing come in from the outside, through the window fan into my floor. It's in the corner of my eye, but I'm frozen in terror because, what now, right? But I suddenly just sort of feel peaceful. The corners of my sheet get tugged on, and I almost lose it, but I realize they're getting tucked into the side of the bed. I feel a warm, sort of soft hand, like my grandfather's, press on the small of my back. I'm suddenly no longer terrified. In fact, I'm sort of serene and never been more at peace. I crack an eye open and I see that it's now 1 a.m. Everything settles and I'm calm, and not only do I feel better emotionally, but my illness even feels a whole lot better. A refreshing, rejuvenating breeze comes into the room and it carries me off to sleep. At night, I sleep really peacefully too. I wake up the next morning. My family member is frying eggs and the house is the brightest that it's ever been. It's like a Disney movie with animated birds outside singing. The food is fresh, the world is bright and new. Every family member is happy and even my brother is in good spirits. It seems like an entirely different world. We are eating breakfast and I thank the family member for tucking me in so late last night. She then says, "Well, that's strange. I went to bed after tucking you in at like 8 p.m. and slept through the night." This confused me for years, and it took me a while, but I realized that after that night, I was never bothered again. No more slamming doors, weird dolls, slamming attics, laundry room door harassment, nothing. Gone. Just like it never existed at all. I'd go on to forget about this until 2015, when that family member died, and I guess, again, up until now. I really still don't know what to make of a lot of it, or how to feel about it. I know it sounds kind of wild, and sorry for that, but I think that there was some type of spiritual intervention that put an end to the haunting, I guess. I sometimes think Grandpa did me one last solid and came to help me. I am not very religious at all, but I just cannot shake the feeling that this is exactly what happened. I know it sounds wild, but I mean, really, I've racked my brain over it endlessly, and really, what could it be? I inevitably burned that Raggedy Ann doll outside with my brother, who seemed to be the only one who ever believed me. By that point, it was emotional closure and not like destroying a spiritual vessel or cursed object. But after that night, I just never experienced anything again. I'd grow up to be just a normal person. I've never since had any auditory or visual hallucinations or anything. I'm convinced to this day that all of this was very real, though. I find it hard to believe any of this ever happened in my head, despite what my parents and teachers said. And in the end, I think some type of guardian spirit stepped in and put an end to it when I asked for help. And quite honestly, I'm just not sure that there's really any other way to see this for me. In any case, thanks for listening, and more importantly, thanks for giving me this safe place to share this. You can only be gaslit and ostracized over real events so many times until it becomes a bit of a sore spot. Stay safe out there, everyone, and never be afraid to ask for help. Two years ago, me and my family moved across states and moved into my current home. We usually have a lot of people in our house, and my family is usually outside on the porch. Some family was supposed to be flying back to the state that we moved from that day too. Now, I was getting home from school last year and was walking through the door. My mum was walking past into her room and I called out to her. She didn't answer me though, so I just sort of brushed it off because she does have pretty bad selective hearing. My dad was outside smoking, so I went outside and gave him a kiss and a hug to let him know that I got home. I sat down and told him that I saw my mother walking into her room and joked that she ignored me. My dad gave me a confused look and told me that she was at the airport dropping some people off. I thought that he was joking with me and laughed, saying that she probably forgot something and was just getting it, and I pulled up my phone to look at her location to prove that she was here, and it said that she was 45 minutes away at the airport. My dad looked at me weird again and said, "I told you so." But the thing with my mum is that she's kind of short. My sisters and I are all a couple of inches taller than her, in fact. She also dyes her hair like an orange color, and one of my sisters has black hair, and the other one is like a dirty blonde, which means that no one really looks like her, so it couldn't have been them. But the real kicker to this story is that maybe about a week ago or something like that, we were talking about ghost experiences in a group of me, my dad, and my mum. I retold my story, and my dad got this sort of look on his face. He does that face when he doesn't want to say something scary, but I pressed him on it, and it turns out that something similar had happened to him too. My dad's from Morocco, and his mum visits from time to time in the States. And one time, when she was supposed to be in Morocco, he saw her walking up the steps to go upstairs. He was home alone because me and my sisters, we were at school or work, and my mum was at my aunt's house that day. He chills on the couch a lot, and from sitting where he usually does, you can see the top portion of the stairs in our home. He, being the man that he is, walked up the stairs after he saw that, and she disappeared upstairs. But he gets upstairs anyway, and sees her walk into the room that she would use when she lived with us. My dad abruptly walked into the room, convinced that she was somehow here, but obviously no one was in there. So, apparently we have an entity that likes mimicking mothers. Oh, and by the way, I saw my mother completely solid. It genuinely looked like my mum, even right down to wearing what she wore that morning. I currently work the overnight shift at a residential treatment facility for troubled youth. Our original facility was out in the country, and it was originally a hunting cabin before being refurbished and added onto for this purpose. That facility, it closed down recently and relocated to a more central facility in the city, which used to be a home for young mothers. Now, I've had multiple experiences at both locations. Despite my prior history of paranormal occurrences, I don't usually assume that every weird thing is paranormal, especially with my graveyard shift hours. I mean, I sometimes might chalk them up to just the effects of fatigue or whatever. But my experiences were validated after sharing them with some co-workers who had worked there a lot longer than I have. You see, in our old facility from my office, you could see directly down the hallway, off of which were clients' rooms. One night, out of the corner of my eye while doing some paperwork around 4 a.m., I saw a pale shape or figure emerge quickly from one of the rooms and then dart back inside without making a sound. Since I wear glasses, my peripheral vision is very blurry, and since I saw this out of the corner of my eye, I figured that it must have been one of the clients. It seemed unusual though, because the clients don't wear anything that is pale or whitish in color like that. Also, why would they dart out and back in so quickly in the middle of the night like that? It was suspicious either way, and so as soon as I saw it, I got up and quickly went to the doorway in question to see if the clients were okay. It took me about 5 seconds to cover the distance, and when I got there, the clients were clearly very asleep. And I mean, there's just no way anyone could have gotten out of bed, into the hallway, and back into bed so quickly without making a single sound, or seeming so convincingly asleep, since it was quiet enough and the building is old enough that I could have even heard when clients simply turned over in their bed. That was the most noticeable one there, but there were other times I saw shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye, but they were gone so quickly when I looked closer that they might have been just my imagination. Also, though, there was a time when there was a set of curtains rustled and moved slightly on their own, even though there was no draft that could have even moved them. I checked, there were no vents nearby, all the windows were shut and locked, there was no wind outside that day either, and nothing else had moved near them. After relating my sighting, though, of the pale figure to a co-worker, they just sort of laughed at me and said that it must have been the lady in white. Apparently, multiple staff and clients over the years had reported seeing a female figure in white. No idea who it could have been, though. I also heard stories of kitchen cabinets opening and closing on their own, books flying off of bookshelves, and multiple sightings of shadow figures. Now, at our new facility, the one that used to be a home for young mothers, the activity has died down considerably, though this facility has its own share of spooks, that's for sure. On one of my first nights here, I heard footsteps in the hallway approaching the office. In this facility, the office is on the corner, and you can't really see anything from inside except the opposite hallway wall. You have to leave the office to see down either hallway. So I assumed it was a client awake and about to ask for something. I peeked my head out the door, but when I did, there was nobody there. The footsteps sounded light and fast, though, like a child's perhaps. This facility is very well lit, even at night, and if someone were approaching the office, you could see their shadow on the wall before you actually saw them. And one night, I swore that I saw what looked like a person's shadow moving across the wall in the way that you'd expect an actual person to follow. So again, I peeked my head out, but there was no one there. couple of other times, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the edge of a figure passing by the office window, as if they'd just passed by and were going down the hall. Both times, what little I saw of the figure before it disappeared just sort of appeared black and adult-sized, I guess. I've also heard footsteps a couple of other times, including with a new co-worker who I was training one night. That was kind of nice, honestly, because I knew for sure that it wasn't just my imagination and me going crazy, as he definitely heard them too, and got freaked out by it like I did. In any case, I related these occurrences to my new supervisor, who has worked in this building for a long time. They shrugged them off and just stated very matter-of-factly that the building is haunted. Before my current company took over management of this facility, it had previously been run by a Catholic religious organization, and it had been staffed by nuns. My supervisor told me that they and others have seen figures of nuns in the hallways before, as well as the apparition of a young girl. They suspect that might have been what has been making this childlike footsteps that I keep hearing. Also, before my own experiences here started, my supervisor did warn me that I might hear strange noises at night, but that there were usually nothing to be concerned about. None of these things have really freaked me out much, I guess, but I mostly just find it weird and sort of interesting and amusing, I guess. And I actually enjoy being in this place where co-workers have also experienced things, so I don't feel so alone or feeling like I can't tell anyone because I'm afraid that they'll think that I'm crazy or a liar or whatever. It is the first job that I've worked where paranormal occurrences are so commonplace that they're believed. I wonder if it's because of all the negative energy surrounding our troubled clients, perhaps. I won't pretend to know that I have the answers, but this is the story that I have, and I swear by it. Right now, I'm 22, I'm male, and when I was around 9 or 10, I don't remember the exact age, my father asked me if I wanted to go with him to repair an old lady's broken television. My parents at the time were divorced, so my mother had no idea about this whole trip. Back then, I knew my father was often sad because of the divorce and being forced to see his kids less, and I knew that he just wanted to spend more time with me, so I said sure, why not, even though I would have much rather stayed home to just play video games. This old lady lived in a small village, 20 minutes away with car from our town. When we arrived, everything was pretty much normal. I mean, you could see some people on the streets here and there, and once we arrived at the lady's address, I only saw one person on the street. He was a man in his mid-30s with unkempt black hair and dirty clothes. He was either on his way to do his daily farm duties, or he was already done with them and was on his way to the pub. We parked in front of the lady's house and rang the doorbell on her gate. The entrance door was a bit far from the gate, so we couldn't hear if the doorbell was working or not, and also couldn't see it because it was on the other side of the house. 2 minutes pass and there's no answer. We rang again. Another 2 minutes passed and nothing. By the third time that we rang, I was already hopeful that the lady just wasn't here and that I'll be able to go back home and play on my PC. 5 minutes later this time, but no answer again. My father tried calling the lady, but there was no answer to the phone either. He kept calling her over and over again, but he never got an answer. At this point, we must have been in front of the gate for like half an hour, until the man that I saw earlier came back and approached us. He asked us if we were looking for the lady who lives there. We obviously answered yes and told him that she's not answering to her doorbell or phone. The stranger immediately proposed us with an idea. I'm trying to remember this exactly as best as I can, but it was something like, I know a way around her gate, we can get into her garden that way, which was obviously a bit weird, but because me and my father had been waiting there for quite a while at this point, neither of us questioned it, and my father agreed to it. So my father proceeded to follow the man and walk around the lady's gate. I was left there alone for a while. I forgot to mention too that this I forgot to mention too that this whole thing happened around noon, so it was much less scarier for me. My child brain could only be scared if it was dark outside at the time. Otherwise, this was just rather boring. But around 10 minutes later, my father and the other man shows up in front of the gate and opens it from the inside. And they both looked rather taken aback. I remember my father saying, "I'm going to go back, you stay here with the stranger," and I agreed. A couple of seconds later, when we were alone, the stranger starts talking to me. I'm vaguely quoting him again, but it was something like, "Dude, the old lady that you came here to see is dead in front of the door. She's naked, laying on her stomach, and there's blood everywhere." That was it. That was all that he said to me. He also asked my name, if I remember right, but that was pretty much our entire conversation until my father came back, with a much more concerned face. He and the man started talking about the next steps. The stranger started explaining how that morning he saw another man entering the ladies' garden the same way as he and my father had just done, and walked towards the front door but never seemed to come back out again. He started blaming himself that he could have stopped all of this from happening if he had just cared a little bit more. But at the time, honestly, neither of us could blame him. My father called the police, obviously, and we were told to stay there until they arrive. While we were waiting, another person showed up, around the same age as the other man with similar dirty clothes. The two strangers started talking to each other. The guy told everything to the other person the same way as he told me. I don't think he did it too, because he didn't feel the weight of the situation. He just probably didn't know any better. But the cops arrived about 15 minutes later. A few of them went inside the house, while two of them started questioning my father. After a few questions, he turned to me and said, "Hey, I know a friend in this village, and you're gonna go stay at their place, alright? Until I'm done talking with the police." I think he did this because he knew that if my mother was told about this situation, she would have made sure that I'd never see him again. So I did as he said. Sometime later, a middle-aged lady approached us though and walked away with me to a house close by. I was welcomed by a family with 3 to 4 children. I don't remember exactly, but that doesn't matter either way, but at this time I still had no idea what was going on because the concept of sexual assault and murder was non-existent to me. The only thing that I knew was that the old lady in the house was dead, and now I have to stay with this family until the police is done with my father. The lady sat down next to me with her husband, and they started talking to me that it's going to be alright, and that I don't have to worry about my father. She's going to take care of me until he's done with the police. All of this at the time meant absolutely nothing to me. I was so clueless of the situation as a kid that I didn't even answer her reassurances. I just turned to the window and watched as my father was still talking to the cops. As the day went on, the family members of the house got more and more depressed. The lady even started crying. I knew that she was crying because of the whole situation, but only later I realized how truly dark the whole thing was. One day, the old lady in the neighborhood is happily living her life, and the next day she's just dead. No more kind regards from her or cheering waves in the morning, just a house with, well, no one inside. Around 10 o'clock, the lady gets a phone call and tells me that my father is done with the police and I can finally go home with him. As I reunite with my dad, we both get into the car and drive home. Neither of us said anything about what had just happened in the past 10 hours. My father is pretty bad with communication, honestly. Not clinically bad, he doesn't have any conditions or anything, but he's just sort of bad at it. When we got home, I went to my bed and, honestly, I slept just fine. The next day, everything was normal, like nothing even happened. I didn't say a word to my mother when the weekend ended because I didn't want to get my father in trouble. Now that I think about it too, I don't think I ever told her about this whole incident. Anyway, 2 weeks later, my big sister comes in the morning with the news about a local doctor getting arrested for sexually assaulting and murdering an elderly woman in her doorway. Me and my father exchanged a look, and I remember him saying something about it, but I cannot remember for the life of me what it was. After that too, I never heard about the whole story ever again. After all of these years, the whole situation still feels like a memory that just never happened. So much so that 2 years ago, I asked my father if it actually happened, or if I'm just remembering a childhood nightmare or something. But of course, he said that it did happen, and that really, it wasn't a dream. So this started about a month ago when I was house sitting for my brother while he and his wife were on an anniversary trip. I was just sleeping there for the night and fell asleep on their couch, since it felt weird to sleep in their bed. I couldn't find a blanket and there wasn't one on the couch, but when I woke up, I had one on me. I asked my mum if she had gone by and put one on me, since my brother lives literally like 5 minutes from her. But she said no and that she was too tired to drive there that night. Anyway, a couple of days later, I told my sister-in-law about this, and she said my nephew, her son who's 3, had been seeing things and said that he saw a skinny person walking around there, but there was no one there obviously. I started calling it Toby because that's the name of the demon in Paranormal Activity, and my mum called it Red Rum. Now, my name is Joseph, and my nephew, who can't speak well, always calls me Yorvis. This is important because last week I was taking him to the local arcade, and he went to my brother asking him for quarters, yelling out, "Yorvis, Yorvis," and I was walking behind him, and I heard clear as day a woman whisper Yorvis as I was walking past the living room. Seriously, it sounded as if it was whispered right in my ear. And I mean, it couldn't have been my sister-in-law because she was on the other side of the house and no one was near me besides my nephew. Finally though, my sister-in-law said that night that her and my brother woke up to a golf ball being dropped in their kitchen. But she went out to look in case it was just my nephew playing, since he does play with them a lot, but when she got there was no golf ball anywhere. Nothing near there, in fact. My sister-in-law told me to take back whatever I did because she's worried that it's a demon, while my brother is the horror movie husband, you could say. They live in a small house that's kind of old, but I don't think anyone died there, and I don't know, it's just kind of weird, and really, I don't know what to do about it. So I just got back from a trip to New York City. I go there multiple times a year as I have family and a handful of close friends that live there. I've been meaning to share this since it happened a couple of nights ago, but I wanted to make sure that I had the time to sit down and really regather all the details correctly. And look, I'm sure we've all had those crazy subway stories at one point or another in our lives, but genuinely, I never thought that I would end up in one this terrifying. So, I was heading back to my hotel from a friend's house at about 3 a.m. the other night. My friend lives deep in Brooklyn, my hotel was in Manhattan, so if you know the city, then you know that that's about a 30 to 45 minute long train ride, give or take. My friend finally arrived and I was happy to be headed home. I was exhausted and it was really late. My trip had been going unexpectedly well up until this point, so I had faith that I would be able to get home with no worries, especially since the trains and the streets were basically empty at this hour. The train was brand new and had just been cleaned, something that I've never even seen before, to be honest. Heck, it even smelled like a new car, and still had fresh mop water on the floor. There was only about 3 other people on my train, all minding their own business. So far so good, right? Well, about 2 stops into the train ride, a man that looked like maybe he was in his late 20s stumbled into our train car mid-ride through the connecting doors of the cars. He had on a Nike ski mask, which usually isn't a good sign on a nice 70-degree night in general context, but I'm not one to judge by appearance. Plus, I know the shiesty mask is sort of a trend nowadays, so I didn't think too much of it at first. He sort of hobbled in, and he was clutching his stomach, almost as if he was concealing something or hiding a wound. His eyes were bloodshot red, and at first I thought that it was because he was high or something. He immediately hobbled into the nearest corner and sort of sulked in the corner, facing it until the next stop. He then ran out the closest door and erupted into the most painful crying that I've ever heard. He was just screaming, moaning and crying, all while running sort of alongside the stopped train on the platform, still clutching his stomach, screaming things like "why" and gasping through his tears. Keep in mind, I'm sitting in the middle of the train facing away from the side that he got off, so I'm kind of breaking my neck behind me as he's running behind me to watch what's going on. He then ran back inside the same car, through the door on the opposite side of the car now. He was on my right before, but now he's on my left. There's no one in between me and him now, since everyone else is closer to the right side. He did the sulking while facing into the corner thing on the other side of the car now, but this time he kept crying and yelling things like "why" again, but he was crying so hysterically that it was hard to make out a lot of what he was saying. From the certain words that I gathered, though, I'm almost positive that a very close friend of his had just gotten killed or something, I guess. It's really the only thing that would explain the way that he was acting and the things he was saying. Plus, he was suited up like he had just come back from a street mission gone bad or whatever. At this point, everyone on the train was frantically flicking their eyes over to him every few seconds. You could tell that they were panicked but not trying to cause a scene about it or rile him up anymore. I was getting a little sussed out myself, but I had seen and heard about worse on the subway, and if someone that he knew had really just died, then honestly I sort of felt horrible for the guy before anything else. But then, the entire situation escalated to a point that I had only ever seen in movies or crime shows until now. The man stayed in this corner crying and screaming and muttering things to himself for about another 3 minutes or so, all while continuing to clutch his stomach as if he was concealing something. I had definitely seen a black object in his hand too by this point, but I couldn't tell if it was big enough to be a gun or not. After I saw this, I tried not to take my eyes off of him for too long at a time, since I was the closest person to him, but I also didn't want to stare. He was starting to say concerning things though, like, "someone's going to pay for this," and then he would just repeat it louder and louder, and then he burst into a dialogue that genuinely made my heart drop. Keep in mind, he's still facing the corner, hunched over, clutching his item. He then says, "All of you sitting on this train right now, you're all going to feel me tonight. You hear me? You're all going to feel me tonight. And you're all going to hate it too. Oh man, you're all going to hate it." He kept getting louder and louder as if he was saying this to the point where he was basically screaming by the last part. I don't know what he said after that, because as soon as that train stopped next, I just absolutely bolted. He was screaming at me as I got off, but I couldn't hear it, and I definitely wasn't trying to turn back. I ran back up to the nearest street exit, chain smoked a couple of cigarettes, and I waited 20 minutes for the next train to come. I've seen enough in my life to know that this wasn't a situation that I was willing to gamble with at all. I do pray that the last 3 people on that train got home safe and nothing happened. I briefly searched Twitter and the news the next day for any possible information that I could find, but I didn't see anything. Honestly though, who even knows what's worth a headline to them down there anymore? I had a close, dear friend years ago. We went to high school together and instantly became close, as we enjoyed the same, well, everything pretty much. Movies, games, activities, and so on. This friend had a beautiful cottage in Muskoka, which was about an hour and a bit from the area that we lived in. They would talk about it a bunch, saying how awesome it was to go there in the summer, as it was right by a river and was perfect for swimming and paddleboarding and all that. They also said that it was kind of haunted though, just a passing comment about how it was spooky, how they'd hear things at night, how it was probably home to a ghost. They always said this jokingly, like it was no big deal, so We'd usually laugh at the idea that their beautiful and pretty much newly built cottage was actually a ghost house. Fast forward a couple of years and they invite me out to their cottage in October. The family was going up and my friend asked if I could come with them. I was super excited to go because I'd never really been to Muskoka and knew how beautiful it could be, especially in the fall, and also how often my friend mentioned the fun that they'd have at that cottage. I want to now preface what comes next with the fact that I have never had any paranormal stuff happen to me, ever. I don't disbelieve it and never have, but I've never been in a position where I'd feel like, okay, this is definitely paranormal stuff. Until this event. So we get to where the cottage is located in this small community called Matthiasville. As soon as we enter, I just get this weird feeling, like a shadow had been cast over me. It was a beautiful sunny day with good vibes, all the way up until we crossed the bridge that led into the community. The weather suddenly turned overcast, but it wasn't that. There was a heavy and weird energy there. We're driving along the riverside for some time, and I tell my friend about the energy feeling, to which they said, "Oh, I know, it's weird, right? Like heavy." Things lighten up. However, when we arrive at the cottage, this place was absolutely beautiful. New build, 3 floors, big deck on the 2nd floor, and tons of windows that went floor to ceiling. It overlooked the river, and it had a forest trail at the back even. The trail was way too thick with brush and wood to even try to navigate, so we spent a lot of our time out by the water and on the big deck just sort of chilling. We drive into the nearest town, Bracebridge, for some outings, and at night we dedicated our time to beating the COD World at War campaign, split screen. It was an absolute blast. We went for a long day walk too and saw some of the interesting points of Matthiasville, a big dam, and beyond that a strange and small sort of graveyard that was situated on a slight hill at the very tip end of the community. All the graves were pretty old and some of them were unmarked. Others you couldn't even make out what the stones had written on them. It was eerie, but nothing out of the ordinary happened for the first 2 nights that we spent there, so I just thought that it was all a nothing burger. Now, on the 3rd and last night, the dad had to head home early for some work stuff, so it was just my friend, their mum, and myself hanging out for the night. The mum was sleeping in the loft way up on the 3rd floor, and we made the basement floor our home for the weekend. We decided to watch a movie and eat some snacks, but when that was finished, I suggested that we go out for a night walk since it was a clear night with a big moon out, and I loved going for night strolls. Plus, we hadn't really been out and about after dark, and the place was pretty beautiful at night too. My friend, though, was really against this. They said that the place was spooky enough during the day, let alone at night. But I managed to convince them, and so out we went. We were walking along the road that went along the river, towards the dam and the end of the community where the graveyard was. We made it about a quarter of the way when my friend stopped dead in their tracks. I looked back to see what was up, and they were just sort of standing there, and they looked defensive. I asked what was up, and they said, "We need to go back, like now. This feels weird and I don't like it at all." I asked if they were scared, like if they heard an animal or something. And as soon as I asked that, we heard what I can only describe as a deep and loud crackling and snapping of wood in the dense forest above us, on a rocky ridge that was beside the road, opposite side of the river. I looked up to where we heard it, and it suddenly felt like everything just hushed. Crickets and all other nighttime sounds seemed to have just completely stopped. My friend quietly said my name. I looked back at them, and then suddenly, the bushes and the shrubs underneath the ridge on the other side of the road just exploded, as if something huge jumped in them and thrashed around. This made us bolt, and I remember just saying "run" as I followed behind my friend. We ran non-stop straight to the basement door of the cottage. We got there in minutes, but it felt like seconds. We ran straight into the basement bedroom, and we both hopped into the bed. I remember saying that it was likely a coyote or a raccoon or something, but as soon as I said those words, a creaking started forming up above us in the living area of the first floor. The creaking soon turned into slow, heavy footsteps, back and forth, and loud as if someone was wearing work boots or something. I remember my friend through tears saying, "Does that sound like a coyote to you?" I cannot even describe the absolute feeling of dread that just suddenly washed over me, like there was something up there taunting us. We lay in complete silence for what felt like hours. We got into the bed at around 3 a.m. after our walk, which turned into a run, and the footsteps didn't stop for an hour or so at least. Eventually, I remember finally falling asleep at about 6 in the morning. When we woke up, the first thing that we did, of course, was ask the mum if she had been awake last night at around 3 a.m., and she assured us that she wasn't. She hadn't even gotten up once to use the bathroom, she said. Even if she did, we should have been able to have heard her door open and then the footsteps down the loft stairs. I mean, everything was open concept on the first floor, so it was easy to hear things going on there. After that, though, we packed up and left, and my friend's parents sold the cottage a couple of years later, and I don't think any of them went back once after that weekend. I was curious about the area afterward, though, so I eventually did some Googling and learned that it was once a sawmill or something like that, and a tragic accident happened there. I believe the owner's son drowned or had a bad accident in the mill or something tragic like that. I want to say that that could be a factor here, but honestly, who knows? All I know is that night, I heard heavy, clear and loud footsteps pacing around above us on the first floor. And that was my first and only paranormal experience that I will never, ever forget. I never really discussed this because, well, it creeped me out. But I remember it from time to time. This happened years ago, and I was in a long-distance relationship at the time. So every other week, I went to my ex's hometown and stayed there for the weekend. It was about a 2-hour trip to get to the town station and another 2 hours to walk by foot to get to his house. 15 minutes if you go by car, which isn't always available. His hometown is a province surrounded by thick forests. It's a long walk just to get to the stores and food establishments as well. I usually had to walk on the road meant for vehicles that cut through the forests. A lot of times I get to the hometown late, so I'm usually walking in pitch black areas around 8 at night with just a flashlight for 2 hours just to get to his place. At this hour, there were no cars driving by, and it's a pretty quiet town anyway. It was always so eerie when I was walking for a long time in the woods, though. There were a lot of parts of the woods that are completely silent, not even sounds of bugs or birds, just my footsteps. Those were the times when I felt like I was being watched, but I never turned around in fear that I might see anything or whatever. But after maybe a few weekends of me doing this and staying there was a weekend when a car was available. My ex took me to the station and we parted ways there. When I got home, he called me and said that his relatives, who were driving home, they lived near my ex, had seen me walking by the road in the forest. They had been discussing it before he called me because they were scolding him for making me walk to the station alone at night like that. He explained to them that he drove me to the station and that there was no way that I was in the forest since I was already home too. I asked if they were sure that it was me or just someone who looked like me, but they perfectly described what I was wearing that day. But they haven't seen me at all during that weekend, so there's no way that they could have known what I was even wearing. To add to this as well, his relatives are not the type to joke about stuff like this. They also said that they got a good look at this person and that it was definitely me. Until now, I don't know how to explain it. It creeps me out thinking about it and knowing that there was something that copied my appearance. I eventually broke up with my ex and realized how much I despised his hometown. The air there feels heavy and depressing. He also said the same thing back then, but I don't really know anything about doppelgangers, and I'm still skeptical about them, but this always makes me question what I believe in. I also had a previous incident back then too with my friend group. All of us were walking down the stairs in school. We went to the bathroom and found one of us missing. We were asking each other where she was because we were just talking to her as we were walking. But this friend showed up in the bathroom complaining that we didn't wait for her and she was left in the classroom while getting her stuff. We genuinely thought that she was just messing with us. I mean, we were literally talking to her before she disappeared. But a lot of other people had vouched for her that she was always in that classroom with them, and they left the classroom together with her before she looked for us in the bathroom. So, again, I just don't know how to explain this. So I'd like to preface this with the fact that I have no idea exactly who or what it is that I saw, but it's pretty spooky regardless of whether or not it has an earthly explanation, and that's the part that continues to haunt me 10 plus years later. So I grew up in Sleepy Hollow, New York, home of the Headless Horseman, and allegedly a number of other hauntings. I was 16 at the time and riding shotgun in my then boyfriend's car, headed home on Old Sleepy Hollow Road at 3 in the morning. This was before my parents enforced a curfew because I was taking advantage of it. At the end of Sleepy Hollow Road is Sleepy Hollow Road and a stop sign, at which making a left brings you through a densely wooded area to my parents' house. Old Sleepy Hollow Road, it is dark and curvy and cuts through the woods that contain the old carriage trails which connect to the cemetery, where the Headless Horseman is laid to rest and set to ride, as well as where some of the other legends of Sleepy Hollow originated. Not many cars frequent this road. Outside of tourist season, the village is quiet and the houses back there are quite sparse. This was the case, even more so about 10 years ago. There weren't and still aren't many lights on in these back roads, but there is one right next to the stop sign, almost like a spotlight. When we pulled up to that stop sign, I got such a fright because a young woman wearing nothing but a long white gown or otherwise thin white dress was very suddenly standing on the road right next to the stop sign. At first I was scared that we were about to hit her, but when we drove away, the reality of the situation really started to sink in, and that's when I felt extremely unsettled. What was she doing there at 3 in the morning? It gave me a heavy pit in my stomach. This was around November in New York. It was quite frigid, and she had no jacket or any shoes on. There are houses back there, but really not that many. She didn't look directly at us at all, despite us almost hitting her, and it almost seemed like she was just staring straight through us or beyond us. She was unblinking and unmoving, in fact, very pale with the cliché long dark hair to match it. I remember asking my boyfriend if he just saw what I just saw, and he just nodded. We never really spoke about it again until many years later when I confirmed with him that it really happened. It wasn't just a figment or a dream or something. My parents live up against those woods with my room on the bottom floor. I don't think I slept in my room for months after that incident, and to be honest, I still think of it when I visit. I have since read a lot about this figure and different accounts of it. There are stories of ladies in white across many cultures, but one thing that many of the tales have in common is the betrayal of a lover. This boyfriend was my first love, and unbeknownst to me at the time, he was secretly sleeping with my best friend behind my back. To this day, it remains one of the worst betrayals of my life. Eventually, he became very violent towards me as well, and I can't help but wonder if she was a warning of some sort. Of course, there are other related ghost stories in the immediate vicinity of where this occurred, like the woman who froze to death at Raven Rock where she sought refuge during a harsh winter storm, a colonial woman who died hiding from a violent suitor, a Native American girl who was killed at the hands of her jealous lover, a teenager who died after being pushed out of her boyfriend's car during an argument. Hulda of Bohemia's homestead was in those woods, A quick 15-minute walk from my parents' house, in fact. I doubt it was her, but she has a very sad and incredible story associated with her for those who are interested. My favorite Sleepy Hollow figure, in fact. Truthfully, the list of many supposed apparitions of the area could go on for far longer. The happy ending, I guess, is that I dumped that loser and I grew up to work in the morgue. I definitely don't scare easily, and while I've had a few other unusual experiences throughout my life, this one is truly a mystery to me. I think of it every time I drive past that stop sign, and I sometimes still have dreams about it, as was the case last night. So I've resolved to get it all out here in an attempt to unload it to some internet strangers. Feel free to share your opinion or theories or similar stories, skeptic or not, because it's nice to be able to talk about this, and it's nice to be able to get it off my chest. I have experienced shadow figures for a number of years. My partner is a skeptic, on the other hand. Well, was. You see, within the past 2 weeks, we have both had a number of terrifying experiences. The first time it appeared was to my partner and my dog. Paul had taken the dog over the field at around 1 in the morning. As he entered the field, he saw a figure to his right, but he thought that it was a local teen smoking, so he didn't pay too much attention. As he got along the tree line and bent down to get the dog's mess, he heard the trees rustling and sort of looked up. The same figure was now in the bushes, and he could tell now that it was completely black and featureless. It was a prominent figure, but a black and greyish prominent figure that looked like it could charge through you, his description. He was terrified, and both he and the dog ran. The thing charged through the undergrowth, keeping level with Paul. Branches were breaking, but whatever it was, it sounded weird. Inhuman was his description. The dog ended up dragging Paul, and they ran until they got home. He's a skeptic, but he cannot explain it. We went down in the day, and there was no clear path through the undergrowth, and no broken trees or branches or anything. A few days after, I was in the same field with the dog, and I heard rustling in the bushes and felt really oppressed and negative suddenly. I looked towards the rustling, saw leaves moving, and went to see if it was a mouse or something like that. But there was nothing there. I was looking around for a bit, and eventually I looked above me in the trees. And there, up in the tree, was what I can only describe as a shadow creature. I told it to go home and that it was lost. I eventually turned and walked away. I walked home, but nothing chased me. We both walked the dog the following night and felt evil energy and knew that we were both being watched all of a sudden. We both knew exactly where we were being watched from as well, and both felt it at the same time. There was nothing visible there, mind you, but it was uncanny how we both pointed to the location where we both felt it coming from. The last incident happened at 4 a.m. this morning. I was walking down the road that I live on, and a black figure moving fast caught my attention, but I thought that it was the local addict, definitely a person. I came level with the alleyway that the figure had entered, and that was when I saw a black humanoid mass that I can only describe as radiating evil, staring at me from what should have been its face, but it had no features. It was directly under the lamppost, which was working, and I could see it, absolutely everything. And whatever it was, it felt really malevolent. The best description that I've heard of it is that it's a bull of a thing. The feeling it gives off is worse than seeing it, to be honest. I'm not usually fazed by shadow people, but this thing is dark, and it has me worried. If anyone has any insights on how to deal with all of this, then I would greatly appreciate it. I, a 28-year-old female, live with my sister, 26. She has 2 small dogs that also live there, and I have 2 cats and sleep with my door open, so they can go in and out as they want. My sister sleeps with her dogs in her room with her door shut. When she gets up in the morning, her dogs run out and get into my bed with me because I usually sleep in later. My boyfriend spends the night most nights and leaves our house at around 7:45 in the morning to go to work, where he clocks in at 9 a.m. I sleep with no lights and blackout curtains. My boyfriend doesn't turn any lights on and just leaves the room and gets ready outside of my room too so that I can sleep. Now, this morning my mum was here while I slept because her and my sister were going to go shopping together. My sister's alarm went off at around 10 in the morning and she got up to go to the bathroom. She said that she noticed that my door was shut, which is unusual, and she went to the bathroom, right next to my room. When my sister came out of the bathroom, she could see my door was now open and her dog was just sitting in my room and staring. This would be the first time in almost 3 years that they haven't just immediately hopped into my bed. She told her dog to lay down or to come out with her, but her dog just didn't move. She came into my room to get her dog and was startled to see my boyfriend sitting up in bed next to me because he's usually gone for work before she gets up. The room was pitch black, except she said that there was a light on him, like he had his phone on or something. She left quickly because she was obviously embarrassed to have come in while my boyfriend was still in bed with me. She said that I was in bed sleeping on my side. She asked my mum if she had opened my door, but my mum said no. Later though, I wake up at around 12 p.m. and my mum and sister ask me why my boyfriend went to work later than normal. Me, never waking up when he leaves, said, I don't know, but maybe he overslept. I called my boyfriend and asked what time he left, and he said in a really confused voice that he left at 7:45, like normal. My sister didn't believe that, so I asked him to send a picture of his clock in a slip, and it showed that he clocked in at 9 a.m. He would have been at work before my sister even woke up at that, and there was just no light on in my room. I mean, I don't have any lamps next to my bed, and my phone was under my pillow when I woke up, so even if it was a pillow or something in the dark, neither me or my sister can come up with an explanation for the light, let alone why she saw a person in bed with me when I was alone, or how my door opened by itself like that. So my question for all of you is, was this a ghost? A time slip? A glitch in the Matrix? Does anyone have any idea as to what could possibly explain any of this? So this happened about 4 years ago. I used to live in a very rural part of NC, in the Triad foothills area. I was about 17 at this time, and my house was in the woods, about a football field's length away from the road, which wasn't a major one, just a back road. We did have neighbors, I guess, one on one side, and they were pretty close, separated by maybe 10 yards and some trees, but the other side, there's a few acres between us and the nearest house. Behind our house was acres and acres of fields and woods, and there was also a pond down there as well, which is important for later. Now, we had a dog at the time, and he had a sort of lot that we would put him in at night to sleep in. It was nestled in the very edge of the woods, about 100 feet from our house, and it was about 7 or 9 at night, and it was winter. Probably January to February, but I don't remember exactly. What I do know is that the holidays were over, though. I was taking our dog out to the lot that night as well. I had his metal bowl in one hand and the phone in the other. I got about halfway to his lot and suddenly just felt really weird. I did freak myself out taking him out sometimes, so this wasn't particularly extraordinary or anything. I shined my flashlight on the edge of the woods, near to his lot, where it sloped down a little bit and was further into the woods. When I did this, I saw glowing white eyes looking back at me. They must have been about 3 feet to 3.5 feet off the ground. My mind deduced that It couldn't have been a squirrel or a small animal, so I immediately yelled for our dog, dropped his food bowl, which made an extremely loud racket, metal on concrete, and just ran inside. I came in freaked out, saying that I saw something in the woods and I was not going back out there. My mum said that I was being dramatic and that it was just a deer and she would go out with me. I felt very confident after the racket that I'd made that whatever it was, it would have left by now, and so I went with her to take him back out. We walked out and I shined my light where the eyes were, and the eyes were still there, just as bright, and stared right at us. My mum got freaked out now, and we both ran inside again. She came in and told my stepdad that I was right, and was freaking out, saying that there was a man sitting down there in the woods. My stepdad then went out there with a real flashlight and a gun, and we followed. He shined it back in the spot where the eyes were. He yelled, "Hey," real loud, and this is when I got the best look at it. The eyes were 100% about 3 feet to 3.5 feet off the ground. Whatever it was, it stared right at us and then walked sideways, not breaking eye contact, very fluidly, and then went off into the woods. Mind you, we never heard a sound. No leaves breaking, no twigs snapping, nothing. Never saw anything like it since then, and every time I took my dog out, I never saw anything like that again, despite checking every time. Now, before anyone asks, I don't know how my dog was acting. At the time, I was just too scared to pay any attention to it. I do know that he sometimes eats possums and skunks that fall into the lot, and would bark at other stuff like deer and foxes. The whole encounter, he was silent though, and seemed to just run inside with us and stayed close with us. The land behind the house, I'm almost certain, is native land. Way behind the house, up on a hill overlooking the pond, are stones in the ground, about 2 or 3 with markings on them. With certainty, I can say the inscriptions are definitely old, and are of a form of writing. They're very weathered, not fresh at all, and are precisely drawn lines with parallels and equal spacing between markings and all that. We've also found arrowheads in the area. We jokingly called it the Indian burial ground, but from my research, natives in NC rarely practice burial like this with headstones, so I'm really not sure what it is, but I'm pretty certain that it is native, if not older. Now, the pond, I always got a weird vibe down by the pond fishing, always. It was a natural pond or spring, but my stepdad turned it into a larger pond, and we had cows and stocked it with more fish and all that. There's a large slope that you have to walk down, surrounded by baby pine trees on each side. There's a small circle area right before you go down the hill to the pond, and in this clearing we used to find a lot of bones. I mean a lot. There'd be 3 to 4 piles of fish and snake bones neatly in a pile, normally all missing the head part. This pond is not close to where I had the encounter by any means. It's closer to the other side of the property, if anything, but still on our property, so yeah. But back in this area where I get the weird vibes, my stepdad has old fence posts separating his land and the neighbors. It's an overgrown field or pasture on one side, and straight woods on the other. The neighbors did come back here sometimes, but normally just to ride ATVs. Anyway, one day in the summer I went back there with friends, and in the very back line of the property was a crow's head stuck on the fence post. It was really freaky, and because of that we dipped. I've seen this before at my grandpa's house too. That time when I saw it, it was on a fence post around his garden, and he told me that you do that if crows eat your garden and they'll just stay away. However, when I saw it at our house, there has never been a garden anywhere near that fence post or close to that area at all. Anyway, I'm sharing this story mainly because I'm curious as to what you guys think it is. I can assure you that this creature wasn't any small critter like a squirrel or a raccoon or a deer or anything. I've debunked these myself because the eyes were too big and too high to belong to any small critters, and a deer would 100% have run away after all the racket and noise that we had made, and my stepdad yelling too. I mean, we saw deer routinely, and they're all very skittish as they're prey animal, right? The only animals I can think of that it could be would be a black bear, maybe a mountain lion or a bobcat. I lean more towards feline because it moved extremely fluid and smooth. The issue with this, though, is that mountain lions aren't found in NC, and bobcats are native but would be too small to fit the height of the eyes. A black bear is plausible, I guess, but also very, very rare to find in this area that I live in. You find them mostly in the mountains, if anything. Also, I would think that a black bear would make more noise like grunts and not move so fluidly like that. And like all animals really, they would have made much more noise moving away. It's a small community and everyone knows everyone pretty much, and everyone in that area hunts. There's a lot of game trails out, and usually when someone spots something out of the ordinary, like a bear or a bobcat or a big buck or whatever, it's the talk of the town, but no one's ever mentioned seeing something weird in the area at the time. But like I said, I'm curious as to what you guys have to say about this encounter. I added the info about the native land and the crowhead and the pond, just in case these are any signs of cryptids or whatever, and could be useful in identifying it, if it is paranormal, that is. I mean, I admit that it could be completely coincidental and not related, but I just thought that it could be potentially important. So, if you have any questions or feedback, then shoot them my way and well, let's try and figure this out. I live at home with my mother and sister, in a house constructed at least before halfway through the 20th century, but we can't be entirely sure of the true date. Not many details exist of the home. Yet, with the little details that we have, many photos of the house exist, and I found a few of them hung up in the doctor's surgery and dentist nearby, which is weird, right? Anyway, a little bit of background knowledge is that this house was home to an elderly, practically bedbound man who lived solely upstairs in my sister's room. The closet in the room was turned into a bathroom, but was converted back into a closet after he passed, and my parents purchased the house soon after that as well. He apparently died in that room and seemingly can't pass over or whatever. Ever since I was young, a lot of weird and unexplainable stuff had happened in the house. Like, the first thing that I remember from my own memory is that I was playing in my living room with a plastic TIE fighter and sat on the ground when suddenly it just flew out of my hand and slammed to the other side of the room. I immediately ran out of the room to be consoled by my mother, yet it still never made the idea that something could just fly out of my grasp without anyone else in the room any easier to comprehend or accept. But the worst thing by far is what actually happened to my mum. So my mum works from home downstairs in the kitchen, and to reach the upstairs she would have to get up, walk for maybe 5 seconds, then walk up the stairs for about 10, turn to the right and enter my sister's door to her room. One day though, my mum was working from home like normal and just got off call with a client when she was called by my sister. Mum, come upstairs and see." To which my mum replied, "I'm working, you have to come and see me." She kept calling my mother and she kept replying to just come down. This went on for about 30 or so seconds. And that was when my mother realized that my sister was at school that day and that she was actually home alone. The calling stopped once she stopped replying, and she continued to work, pretty creeped out after that. There are many other weird stories from this house, but for whatever reason, that one always just gets under my skin. So, I'll start this by describing some things. So first, I'm in the car with my brothers and our mum pulls into the driveway of our grandmother's house to check on her due to recent concerns. She hadn't been answering anyone and it had people worried. Now, here are the parts that made it feel closer to a horror film, I guess. So she had hundreds and thousands of broken nutshells on her front porch. She always has lights on in her house after dark, but you know what? This time it was pitch black, no lights through any blinds, and it seemed really odd. Anyway, we pull in and this pit of dread just appears in my stomach, and a sour feeling just fills my mouth all of a sudden. Then my mum turns the radio down and tells us to stay in the car. I mean, cool, I wasn't going in anyway, it was way too creepy. And goes to the door and tries the screen door. It's locked. No big deal, she knocks on the door like an officer, but the inner door opens so quickly, as though she had just been behind the door waiting there. I got chills at that, and our grandmother looked inches taller, which was really weird. My mum goes in and the door closes behind her, and this pit had instantly evolved into a feeling of just dread. My brother and I shared a look as we got the same chills. For whatever reason that evening, the house just felt evil. That's the best way that I can put it. Now, after a few minutes of mentally wanting her to get the heck out of there, she storms out and gets in the car and we pull out. The next few minutes down the road were tense. She seemed mad, annoyed. That's what we thought she was anyway. But then she starts crying. Now we're confused, so we're asking if something happened. She starts to tell us about what happened, and apparently there were no lights on in the house, none at all. Our grandmother goes through the archway in the dark with no problems. Mind you, she has bad hips and she's really clumsy, but she wasn't grabbing the rails on the wall for help or anything this time, nor did my mum smell any cat urine. I know that's odd, but her house has 3 cats and a litter box that is difficult to clean, so it really should smell. I mean, it always does, but not this time. Instead, my mum smells floral scents like lily and lilac and a bit of lavender perhaps, everywhere as well. Then my grandmother stands in the middle of the living room with her arms neatly together, in the darkness still, mind you, while my mum tries to turn on a light, but the light bulbs just were all taken out. Now this was just beyond reasonable because she couldn't have removed them without any help. The floral scent got worse the closer she got to her, and the room was really stuffy, hot, even dark, and our grandmother didn't want any lights on apparently. The couch was against the heater, and the heater wasn't even on. The blanket on the couch was neatly folded like it hadn't been used. All signs of the cats were gone too. My mother said there was this heavy weight on her chest when she was in there, like someone was pushing her chest in, and the way that she spoke apparently was just wrong. She called our mum dear, not sweetie or honey, but dear, and my mum went to give her a goodbye hug, and this is where things got even worse. My mother is taller than her, and so she has her arms over my grandmother's, naturally. But this time, when my mum hugged her, she was shorter than my grandmother. And she said that she looked younger, like there were fewer wrinkles in age, and that it felt like she was hugging a stranger. Bear in mind, too, that my grandmother has been collecting these blue glass things, pretty little things when there isn't any dust on them. And these prized things were apparently now in a box, broken, and the box was shoved against a wall. The next thing was that she always only had a single tooth, but when she talked, my mum said that there was now a full set of teeth. Mind you, she doesn't have any money to get any fake teeth or anything. When my mum practically fled the house, my grandmother just watched us leave in the darkness, still acting really weird. Now, I knew that she had been getting worse with her dementia lately, but I mean, what the heck, right? I mean, that stuff makes you forget everything over time, but not gain height or teeth, pull every light bulb out, and look 30 years younger. Honestly, I would love for someone to make this make any sense at all. We have no idea what is going on with her, and we could really use some help. This happened when I was about 10 years old. I was at a ski resort with my dad, stepmom, and 3 sisters. And when this happened, my sisters, dad, and stepmom were still out skiing, but me and my sister Ava got cold, so we went back to the hotel to get some food. We sat at the restaurant in the hotel until my stepmom came down. We asked her if she could hold the table so that we could go up to the room quickly so that we could drop off our ski jackets. We take the elevator, and once we get off, we start to walk to our room. That's when I hear someone behind me go, "Hey." Keep in mind that we're both still about 10 and 11 at this time. I didn't think that he was talking to us, so I just ignored it. We walked into our room, but before we can close the door, the man steps into the doorway. He was tall, probably about 6 feet, and looked pretty old, maybe in his early 60s or late 50s, and he was wearing the hotel staff uniform, but just without the logos. The thing that raised a big red flag for me, though, was that he was wearing black surgical gloves. He says, "Hey, I was just talking to you." We spin around, caught off guard. Ava says, "Oh, us?" He goes, "Yeah, you. I was wondering if you could grab a pitcher for me and come into my room to pour some water for me." Our parents always told us to never trust strangers, and we already got a bad vibe from him, so we politely declined. His tone then got a little bit annoyed, and he said, "It'll just take a second. Can you please just pour me some water in my room?" At this point, we already knew that this wasn't right, so we said no again. This conversation went back and forth for about 3 minutes until he tried to walk into our room. Our instincts kicked in at this point, and I ran towards the door and said, "Sir, we're good," and I slammed the door on him. Ava and I sat in the hotel room for about 10 minutes, panicking on how we were going to leave or talk to our parents because we had left our phones downstairs. We looked out of the peephole and he was gone, so we eventually bolted down the hallway and ran back down the stairs to the restaurant. Once we told our stepmom, she was obviously mortified and went to the office security. They interviewed us and asked us for the description because they didn't have any cameras in the hallway apparently. We gave them the description and they told us that nobody with that description worked there and that most of them were young broke college students. At this point, it really set in that if I had accepted and just helped him, that may have just been the end of me. So, everyone out there, please do teach your kids stranger danger because it may save their lives just like it did mine. So I don't believe in ghosts, but I also have never hallucinated before or ever again after this. Years ago, I was taking my parents' dog out the front yard to go and pee before putting her to bed. I was staying with them for a couple of months and about 26 or 27 at that time. At some point I noticed standing in front of the tree was the dark figure of a man. It was nighttime, so I didn't think too much of it. I mean, it was just a pure black figure. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat like my dad has, so I naturally assumed that it was probably him. I was a little confused though why he would be outside like this, so I called out to him, "Hey Dad," but I didn't hear anything back. He just stood there as if he didn't hear me. I called out again, still nothing. Then I heard my dad talking, and it was coming from my parents' bedroom, so I quickly realized that whoever was standing there was a complete stranger on the property. Then he bent over and motioned to their dog as if asking her to come here, and even though she was standing on the driveway, she started peeing and her legs were trembling as if she was about to collapse. It was odd because she wasn't barking. It was though she was paralyzed in fear. I then got a closer look and could confidently see that this person wasn't a person, but rather a silhouette of one. At that, I ran as fast as I could inside. I came out just a moment later to look for the thing, and it was gone, and I didn't see it again. The only trace of the experience was the dog's pee on the driveway. Now, rationally, I know what happened was the fact that I was afraid of what seemed like an intruder, and their dog could probably sense that as well. I'm surprised that she didn't bark though. I mean, she's never really reacted this way to being scared. She's always barked like crazy when she is scared. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or evil spirits or anything like that. However, I will admit that it kind of feels like something along those lines. I assume that it was just a hallucination, even though I have no history of that and haven't hallucinated or had mental health problems since then either. But it's really the only explanation that I have. Frankly, I just brushed it off for years, and then I was watching a video compilation of scary stories one year on Halloween, and heard of the Hat Man and how people all over the world have seen pretty much exactly what I did. I'm still pretty secular when it comes to ghosts and stuff like that, but man, after hearing that, what other people had seen, and realizing that it was the exact same thing, if that wasn't the creepiest thing that I'd ever heard, then I don't know what is. It felt like something that a character would come across in a horror movie, not real life. Anyway, the whole thing's a bit embarrassing for me to share with other people, but like I said, I just can't get over the fact that there was something more to this, especially because, well, the dog saw it too, and the dog reacted so strangely. So, I've contemplated telling this story forever, it seems, because it just sounds not real. But I love this place so much, I've decided to share it here. When I was in high school, I worked at the local Pizza Hut, and I was a closing server, so after closing down the salad bar and mopping, I got out of there pretty late. I had this ritual of texting my dad when I was almost done to let him know that I was almost home, but mostly it was to test and see if him and my mum were awake or not. If they weren't, then I would take the long way home on the old country roads. I lived on a dog breeding farm 20 minutes outside of town, and I would smoke a joint or jam out or whatever. Now, one particular night I decided to do this, and I was riding along a back road about 3 to 4 minutes from my house. This is a road that I know very well, and my bus took this road my whole childhood. One thing to note about my area is that I live in the deep woods of East Texas, so most people who own property put their houses about maybe a quarter to half a mile back on the property, and keep their exposed woods as basically a natural fence and defense as well. So, while you can see a lot of driveways and mailboxes, you can see almost no houses, just pretty much woods with chunks taken out. Now, as I'm driving, I come upon a toolbox, like the ones that sit up in the back of a work truck, smack dab in the middle of the tiny dirt road. I pull up to it and stop and open my door, stepping out but not away from my car, and as I take in my obstacle, I realize my headlights are not the only light on the road. There are headlights, small ones, coming up a driveway that was parallel with the toolbox. I quickly sit back down in my car and close my door till only a crack is open so that in a moment's notice I can close it, go off into the grass and get the heck out of there if need be, when a small riding wheel lawnmower comes out of the trees, and riding it is a man in a full clown suit and a mask with a shotgun laid across his lap. He turns and looks directly through my windscreen and into my eyes, and brings the shotgun up out of his lap. Now, I am a country boy through and through. I can smell when I'm somewhere that I'm not wanted, so before he even got the butt of that thing to his shoulder, my car was in drive and in the side ditch of the road. I got out of there, threw my joint out, went home, crawled into bed, and never really spoke about it again. I still don't know what that guy was doing, seeing as this was probably 2018 to 19, so after the killer clown craze. Whether it was a dumb kid or some crazy backwoods man, I'm not really sure, but I'm really glad that I never ran into him again. So, I haven't shared this with anyone because, well, I don't want to seem crazy. I'm just looking for some opinions, I guess, if this was a prank or what. I waited to share this because I was just so freaked out and I didn't know if any of them recognized my car or something. Anyway, so I'm not sure where to start, but I'll do my best. So I live in northern Minnesota in a decent-sized town, 15,000. However, outside of town is extremely rural, with very low populations in the surrounding towns. This happened on the 21st of June, like around 1 or 2 in the morning. So I had training for work down in the Twin Cities at the beginning of that week, and hit the road to head back north at around 9 or so. It's about a 4-hour drive north. The first half of the drive is mostly highway, and then the second half is more of a rural 2-lane road, but still a common road traveled. I'm not sure if any of you have driven in Minnesota, but there are deer everywhere, so I was staying pretty attentive on keeping my eyes peeled for something possibly running across the road. What to look for are their eyes when it's dark, as they tend to stick out in the ditch and you're able to spot them before passing them. So I was on a stretch of road without a town for about 30 miles in all directions, when I noticed a glow in the woods, which was some type of bonfire inside the woods. But also there was a group of people standing in the ditch forming a line towards the woods. I thought that they were deer at first. These are dense woods too, big pine trees, so you can see into the woods fairly easily. I slowed down because I guess I thought that maybe they needed help or whatever. I'm going to try my best to explain it because my headlights were facing forward, so I could only make out one person clearly, and I couldn't see too much detail for the other people, as they were farther away in the ditch closer to the woods. But they were lined up in a row facing the road, but forming a line heading into the woods. They had their heads down looking at the ground, but for each person that was closer to the woods, they were closer to the ground. First person straight up, and then the next looked somewhat hunched over, and then I think the people close to the woods were kneeling. It was hard to make out their age, but I had to guess maybe middle-aged, but I'm not positive. I really could only make out the first person's outfit, but they had on what looked like a white robe with a black sash around it. The sash had a symbol of what looked like a robot, or some type of figurine with its hands facing out, sitting down. There was other imagery on the sash, but I was only stopped for maybe 10 seconds trying to process everything. Also, these people never acknowledged me, as far as I'm aware anyway, just didn't even move whatsoever. I was pretty much frozen with fear, as obviously this is quite abnormal and nothing like I've ever witnessed or heard about here. So I promptly left after I got my focus regained on the road. I tried telling myself that it was some hoax or maybe some different people camping, but it was just too odd and it just seemed like that was not the case. So I guess I'm just wondering if anyone else has experienced something like this or heard about it. And if you have, and if you know anything, well, what is it? I've lived in many haunted houses all my life, each with their own experiences and stories, but for the most part human in nature. This, though, was the first time that I experienced something that I would call inhuman. My dad was in the army at the time, and had been stationed to a base in South Carolina. He found a house for rent and showed us pictures of it. It was a single story at the end of a roundabout, in the middle of the woods. You can see the other house off in the distance through the trees. I looked at the pictures, and whenever I looked at the pictures of the outside, a voice in my head would start screaming at me, "It's in the woods, it's in the woods." Nothing on the inside, just the outside. When we got there, as we were unpacking, a cop pulled up too. I never got out of the car, but talked to my mum through the window about how he knew the previous owners, and just wanted to check on things. We never saw the cop again after that, but it was weird. Anyway, Whenever I go outside, I get the sensation that something was hiding in the tree line and that it wanted me to follow it. I felt like it was trying to be playful and mischievous. I would also see figures walking by the windows and heard scratching from outside even. One night, I woke up hearing something moving around outside. I went to look outside, peeking through the blinds, and I saw something crouching in front of the window. If it was standing, it would have been on two legs and at least 7 feet tall. Given I could see the silhouette of shoulders and knees, I could also see that whatever it was covered in fur. Obviously, I was pretty freaked out. Days later, my parents had taken my brother to the airport as well, and I was home alone. I was doing laundry, and I saw that my room was brighter than normal for some reason. I figured that I must have left my bedside lamp on, so I went to go and turn it off. I stood in my doorway and saw that my lamp was off. Looking up, my ceiling light, which had never worked since we moved in, was on. I texted my mum asking if she had the light fixed, and she said no. That was really weird because we checked that later as well, and that line was broken. Eventually, I left for army basic training, but my mum kept up to date on what was going on there. And she said that she was hearing the scratches and the noises now that I used to hear. One night, she was talking to my dad by the door and said that they both heard someone run up on the porch and rattle the door handle. My dad whipped open the door, but when he did, there was nothing there. We never got any answers to what was in the woods or the house, but it was my first experience with something that honestly felt inhuman. This incident happened a few months ago while I worked at a former police department here in the southeastern US. I was a patrol officer there, and our shifts at the time were 12 hours, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I enjoyed working nights, a lot of fun and crazy things happened, which really kept things interesting. The night started as it usually does as well. A shift briefing, pass on general pre-shift shenanigans. I'd say about the first 3 to 4 hours were pretty normal as well. Wrecks, domestic disturbances, and the likes. But I'd say maybe 11:30 to 11:45, we received a call for a severe wreck. A black sedan rolled over and was upside down in the ditch. The callers who called it never stopped, but they said that they didn't see anyone in or around the vehicle. I was the second one on the scene, my sergeant being the first. Now, I have been to gruesome scenes before, gunshot and stabbing victims, welfare checks to find decomposing bodies, and other terrible scenes. I was generally okay with handling them, but nothing could have prepared me for this scene. So in the car was an infant's child seat ripped from the restraints. My first hope was there wasn't a child in the car. On further investigation, though, the front shield wasn't even attached to the car anymore. It happens a lot in rollovers, but about 30 feet away, in the knee-deep high grass, I saw a depression from what looked to be something displacing the grass. As I approached, I saw the body of a woman, 28 years old, based on a driver's license, and we recovered her. She was in and out of consciousness and hardly being able to speak. We had a lot of trouble with her. When I found her, fire was rolling on the scene, and I radioed to them that I'd found the victim. And despite the noise, I heard distinctly, "Where is my baby?" When I looked back down at her, she was staring at me, and my heart sank, because it was then that I realized that there was a child somewhere in either the vehicle or ejected somewhere out here. I immediately began searching the field after telling my sergeant that a child was also in the vehicle. We searched and searched, and eventually, well, unfortunately, you get the drift. That was the moment that something in me just changed as well. After the mother and the child were transported, we learned the mother succumbed to her wounds. A single car, 2 fatality wrecks. I was placed on admin leave and had to speak with our psychiatrist for several days until they deemed it okay for me to return to shift. My first night back was routine calls that we usually had, the same as the second night. The third night, though, we received a call, once again a wreck, on the same road as before, in the same manner as well. I was closer to the location and arrived at the scene first. Mind racing, heart going 100 miles an hour. The memory suddenly flooded back from that first collision, but as I rolled up to the scene, there was nothing. No wreck, just an empty field and darkness. My blue lights were on, and so were my scene lights. Confused if I was at the right location, I radioed my dispatch to confirm with them, and they acknowledged that I was in the right place. I scanned, and nothing was out of the norm. Nothing was disturbed. The ground looked the same as it had been forever. It was then that I thought that perhaps this was a really cruel prank call or something. Maybe an error on the caller. So I got in my patrol car, turned my blue lights off, and prepared to drive further down the road to have a little look around. As I placed my car into drive, though, I noticed movement out of my peripherals, but when I looked, there was just inky darkness. I shook it off and I drove off. I never did find the second supposed accident, and I ended up being told to clear up as other calls were waiting. But later that night, when things began to calm down, at around 3:30 in the morning, I decided to drive down that road once again, just to take a look. As I turned left onto the road, I honestly felt as if something nudged my right arm. Instantly, my hair on my arm stood on end, and I got the chills. No one else was in the car with me, but I tried to rationalize it. I continued on down the road. As I approached the original wreck scene, I saw off to the side of the road what appeared to be someone standing in the distance in the field. Despite the distance and being in the shadows of my headlights, I could tell what clothes that they were wearing. Blue jeans and a light shirt, but what caught me off guard was I could see the figure holding something in its arms. As I got closer, I slowed down to a crawl, trying to use my spotlight to see better, but when I went back to look again, there was nothing there. Something in me told me to stop the car, and I did. As I got out, I looked into the field with my flashlights from the roadside. Behind me, and on the other side of the road from the field, was a wooded plot of land. And from there, I could hear what sounded like footsteps, but lighter. This was late autumn, and there were a lot of leaves on the ground, so there should have been more noise if someone was walking around on freshly fallen leaves like that. I informed my dispatch that I was stepping out of my vehicle and where. As I ventured out into the field, I found the original spot where the mother laid. Gauze, gloves, and various other medical bandages still laid there intertwined in the long grass. Despite being late autumn, the temperature was sitting around 55 degrees. But as I approached, I could feel the temperature suddenly drop. I got the chills again, goosebumps, and a feeling as if I was suddenly being watched. I scanned again, and still nothing. As I left the spot and began walking back to my car, looking down as to not trip as I went, I looked up and my heart sank. Standing on the driver's side of my car, illuminated ever so faintly, but not enough to see a face, was a woman, holding, clearly, a child in her arms. It was clear, too, the same clothes as before, but just obscured in the face. I called out to her and continued my way to her, trying to shine my flashlight at her, but as I did, I saw her step back into the shadows, my flashlight seemingly not able to pierce that darkness. As I got to my car, I called out again, searched with my flashlight, even going as far as turning my scene lights on, but nothing. Paranoid, I searched my vehicle, searched the wood line, and the feeling of dread became just too strong. And eventually, I got in my car and I just left. Shaken up by the experience, I called my sergeant and told him what happened. PTSD is what he said, and I was told to take the next several days off and to speak with the counselor. It really messed me up. After everything was said and done, though, I did return to work a week later. I just never went back down that road by myself while employed there. Several other people witnessed the same experience after I left, even people who were never even on the scene during the wreck. All described the same woman holding a child in the field, in that tree line. So, a few strange things have occurred to me and my boyfriend since we moved into our current flat last July, and I just feel like this would be the best place to share it and just get it off my chest. It might be a little bit long too, so I apologize in advance, but I was just looking for maybe some answers or some sort of advice. Now, before I describe these events, I'll say that I began experiencing sleep paralysis around 4 years ago, and have had a range of unpleasant experiences with it in the past. However, these experiences have never been physical, only visual. That is, until moving into this new flat. I'll also say that my boyfriend has never had any past experiences regarding anything that he would consider paranormal, though the events that have occurred in the flat have left us both a bit confused and definitely a little bit spooked out too. Since my boyfriend and I moved into our flat, we've experienced minor things such as noises sounding like something has fallen onto the floor and begun to roll across it, only to find nothing that could have made the noise. Other times we have heard noises as if someone large or something large is being dragged across the wall in the hallway, but when we've opened our door to check what was making all that noise, there's nothing there, and the motion sensor light is off too. If it's activated, it stays lit for around 5 minutes. One more common thing too we experience is the chain on the bedroom blinds rocks from side to side sometimes. This doesn't happen as a gentle swaying, though. There have been a number of occasions where we have gone into the bedroom to investigate a loud clattering noise. We've heard it over the volume of our TV and music even, to find it swinging violently from left to right, rather than forwards and backwards. We've tried to explain this away as just a draft, but this would continue to happen even when there was no possible airflow from the windows, vents, fans, or the radiator. And even if this were to be caused by any of these things, the chain would swing forwards and backwards, not left and right, and it definitely would not make such a noise to begin with. It sounds as if it's being lifted up and released, causing it to hit the wall and then begin to sway. Anyway, upon initially moving in, I was having some trouble sleeping, or staying asleep I should say, to the point where I had to seek some medical advice. I was sleeping during the day as I work part-time night shift while I'm at university and finishing work at 7:30 in the morning, but have since just started going to bed earlier in the evening. When I was actually managing to sleep, I would have very graphic, intense nightmares. Some were so bad that I would wake up and just burst into tears even. On a few occasions, I would have sleep paralysis too, but there was one time that this happened that ended up really shaking me up. Across from my bed, there's a wardrobe where both doors are fully mirrored. The right side wall, as you see it from the bed, also has a mirror above a small desk. During this particular sleep paralysis, I watched my boyfriend, who was not home but at work, walk past the wardrobe mirrors from left to right, but this appeared only as his reflection inside the mirror. He then wasn't visible for a moment as he seemed to have walked out of frame of the mirror, until I saw the reflection walk past the other mirror on the right. After this, there was nothing for a few seconds, but I was still in paralysis, until I felt something yank the bottom of my duvet covers away from me. A cliche, I know, but this had never happened to me before. It spooked me out of my sleep paralysis, and I shot up and grabbed my covers towards me, because they had actually moved. I still don't know how to explain this away, as my sleep paralysis experiences have never been physical like this before, so I don't really know what to make of it. But another similar instance happened one night that my boyfriend was driving home from work and got stuck in a bad traffic jam on the motorway, delaying him a good few hours due to the distance from the site that he had been working at. And because I was working early, I went to bed before he arrived home. And at some point in the evening, I remember him getting home and me having a sleepy conversation with him right before he got into bed, and I fell back asleep. I'm not sure how long after this, but I was woken up again, but I was woken up by my boyfriend, who was standing at the side of the bed and had brought us some food. I was instantly confused, asking where he had got the food from and when he had left to go and get it, to be met with the same confusion, because apparently he had only just gotten home. I'm still so confused by this, as this is not something that has ever happened to me and really creeped us both out, and I just don't know what to make of it. But the final straw for me was one evening I was talking to my boyfriend as I was just walking around tidying up, only to turn to him at one point and see what I can only describe as a solid silhouette of a child crouched down directly behind him. At this point, I started straight up freaking out, running into the bedroom and refusing to leave for the rest of the night. The first day that I contacted my stepmom, who is very spiritual and has had all sorts of encounters and experiences with the unseen world, including running her own business where she does Reiki and tarot cards or something, amongst other things. My dad and my stepmom came to visit the following weekend, where she cleansed the flat and recommended that I buy black tourmaline for protection, which I have. But since then, this kind of activity has decreased, but not stopped entirely, resigning itself to just the random, unexplained noises, I guess. But one thing that I noted when my stepmom came to cleanse the flat was that she had asked whose side of the bed it was that my boyfriend slept on, but didn't elaborate why she asked that, and honestly, I didn't ask why at that time, but I'm going to, as the events keep playing on in my mind, and I feel like I have no answers to anything. I really don't know what to make of any of this, to be honest. The only connections that I can make are all leading back to my boyfriend, with the silhouette crouched behind him, the physical sleep paralysis, him getting home twice in the same night, and my stepmom asking about his side of the bed. This is the second place that we've lived together, and the occurrences only started upon moving here. I did scour the depths of the internet and found that supposedly we live right by a ley line, but I've found no solid evidence to support this, though it is apparently discussed in a book about the city that was published in 1987, which talks about legends, folklore, and mysteries. This particular book, however, seems pretty hard to come across, with it either being unavailable or unaffordable. But in any case, does anyone have any suggestions or ideas that I can investigate into a little bit? Because, as for now, I'm just completely clueless, and any help would be really appreciated. So I work as a childcare professional, and one of the kids that I look after had recently gotten into hiking. I decided to take him to a really cool trail in Salt Fork State Park, and we were all set to hike to Hossack's Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The entire trail is about maybe half a mile, which is why I chose this trail for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because any time that I had been on it before, it was very busy and full of people and a very popular spot, which made me feel secure. However, this past summer, we had a cluster of severe summer storms which caused massive damage to the trail, so to my surprise, it was much more difficult and completely empty as well. I wasn't bothered by the trail being obviously empty because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike too, despite the entire width of the trail being washed out until it was no more than a foot wide, with like a 6 to 12 foot drop off into the creek bed. That is solid rock, mind you, and several trees down. He was very athletic though, and I was confident in his abilities if he was. And he was also really excited to tackle our adventure, so we continued. we made it all the way to a platform that allows you to see the entire cave. There were many downed trees surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point. But we had made it this far, so we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceed the few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to the difficulty, so I know exactly what it looked like. There were tree roots directly under the platform, and you could sort of climb up and down either side of them, and it was also worth noting that Hossack's cave is much more like a cliff with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of waterfall directly in the middle. It is not a creepy closed-up cave by any means, and so it was very open and very beautiful. In any case, we got to the cave and I noticed a candle that was not burning recently, but had been at some point, sitting on a large rock that had a heart carved into it. I chalked it up to someone having a date or something and disregarded it. He wanted to climb up to the top, where I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by somebody. I definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about this time that he found a small puddle full of baby salamanders and he wanted to catch them. It was honestly the happiest that I'd seen him in a very long time, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that it was time to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. Eventually, though, we finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging that was absolutely not there before, and he noticed it as well, but didn't pick up on the severity of the situation that we were in. At that moment, I factually knew 2 things. 1, someone was definitely watching us and we didn't see them. And 2, they were now potentially hiding in the woods and made it a point not to be seen but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I was not about to tell him that we were in potential danger. I told him to go in front of me, and I just kept encouraging him that he was doing great over and over, and that thankfully seemed to speed him up naturally. I never did see anyone while we were on that trail. We got to the car, and I locked the doors immediately once inside, and on our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s I would guess, came out of the woods and made it a point to stare at me with the most empty of expressions that I had ever seen. The man followed me with his eyes and his head as I drove by him, and continued to stare at me until I couldn't see him anymore. I knew the third fact at that point, that he had made it a point to make himself apparent to me, and that facts 1 and 2 were true. That stare stuck with me for days too, and I considered counseling after this, as it bothered me for several weeks, causing me severe anxiety for some reason. I tried to tell myself that maybe we just interrupted his bath time and he was camping and didn't want to startle us or something. After all, the crazy-looking man had ample time to do something that he wanted while we were catching salamanders. I just cannot in any way rationalize why he stared into my eyes the way that he did if he wanted to go unnoticed, though. Deep down, I know that it is much more likely that it was a deliberate action intended to scare me. He never had any idea how panicked I was, and to this day, it was the most fun that I'd ever seen him have. He brings it up regularly, and it was a very positive experience for him. But it was one of the worst experiences ever for me, and it made me feel really sick and really disturbed. So I think it's important that I preface this story by stating that I'm always looking for a scientific or logical explanation to anything weird that I encounter. But this had me scared beyond reason, and I've had a hard time finding any explanation. So I work as a care provider and help run homes of folks that we care for. One client I worked with was a man in his 50s. However, his health was declining to the point that most people assumed that he was in his late 70s or 80s. This is relevant too. Whenever I went into his home, I just got uncomfortable vibes, is the best way to describe it. I would always feel extremely depressed or anxious and uncomfortable when I was there. I work with a lot of different people all over the city that I live, in and out of all kinds of homes, and I only ever got those kinds of vibes once before, and that was years ago, but it never felt this bad. It made the home feel, I don't know, oppressive whenever I was there. I just hated being there by myself because of it too. But a few months ago, I started realizing that I was remembering the vibe felt familiar from the other home from years before. As I sat in the kitchen on my laptop one afternoon, I started doing some research on the property to see if I could find any information on its history. Nothing unusual for it, just an older building from what I could find. I also started texting my sister if she ever got that uncomfortable vibe in the other house that I mentioned earlier, because she had also worked there as well. Once I started texting and narrowing down my internet search to see if I could find any information on if anyone had ever passed away or worse in the home, it was like the house knew that I was doing this. The air became heavy. All of the normal hummings of the electric appliances amped up to an uncomfortable loud buzz, and I had to cover my ears because I felt like they were going to pop from the pressure change. The lights overhead got brighter and buzzed as well, and I immediately shut my laptop and left the room. I told my sister that I would have to get back to her because I was done with even thinking about this, as to not agitate whatever took notice. Anyway, fast forward a couple of months. Nothing else major ever happened like that, but I was still always uncomfortable. My client's health continued to decline until earlier this year, when he eventually had to go into more intensive care. I came back one day to gather some things for him and some paperwork. It was a quick in and out visit, and as I went to exit and shut the door, I could sort of see across the main room into the kitchen, where it looked like what I can describe as only a dark silhouette figure just ducked out of sight, but I saw it. I know that I was completely alone in that house too, and I just immediately shut the door and left without looking behind me. I don't know what that was that I experienced there, but it felt like I wasn't supposed to take notice of whatever was there. The scariest part about all of this, though, is that I sort of think that it was feeding off of my client's life force, since he moved in a few years prior and caused rapid aging and decline in health. I'm not going to share anything specific about him, but it was strange how relatively young he actually was, given his physical condition and appearance. This happened 3 nights ago, and I'm going crazy trying to figure it out. I just moved into a new apartment 1 month ago, and I'm still unpacking and settling in. I've been using my parents' address as my mailing address, who live a few towns over, 20 minutes away, all my life. 3 nights ago, my parents called me at 2 in the morning, freaked out, and proceed to tell me this story. Apparently, at 1 in the morning, someone starts banging on their front door and repeatedly ringing their doorbell. My stepdad walks downstairs and opens the door, leaving the front glass door closed and locked. There was a man standing outside, who looked to be in his 30s, with a black hoodie on with the hood pulled up around his face. He didn't have any distinguishing facial features, facial hair, or tattoos. The only thing my stepdad said was that he looked to be Hispanic, perhaps. Neither my stepdad or my mother, who was watching the whole thing out of a window, recognized the man. But the man then says, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for," and gives my full name. My stepdad plays dumb and says, "Who?" The man proceeds to state my full name again, and says that my boyfriend is worried because I didn't come home that night. He claims to be a friend of my boyfriend and tells my stepdad that they're both out looking for me, worried because I didn't show up at home. Mind you, I don't have a boyfriend. I live by myself with my 3 dogs and haven't been in a relationship in the past 5 to 6 months. But here's the weird part. My stepdad asks the guy what boyfriend he was talking about, and the man tells him the name of the boyfriend that I had when I was in 10th grade, nearly 20 years ago. My boyfriend in the 10th grade has a very, very unique Italian name. I've never met anyone with a full name even close to his, but He says my high school boyfriend's name a few more times to ensure that my stepdad hurt him, and repeats that they're very worried about me. Is my stepdad sure that I'm not inside? At this point, my stepdad is weirded out and closes and locks the door in his face. But the man doesn't leave. He lingers in front of my parents' house for the next 10 minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking on the phone. Finally, my parents call the cops, and about 5 minutes before the cops arrive, the man walks down to the dead end on their block and drives away in a silver car. My stepdad was unable to get the license plate, and my parents file a police report, and after that, nothing else happens. After I hear this story, though, I'm just going crazy over the weird details. I mean, how would someone know who I dated nearly 20 years ago? And what would the motive be of making up a story that included that weird detail about my past? I have not had contact with the 10th grade boyfriend in over a decade. Yesterday, I decided to message him on Facebook, though, to see if he has any insight. I tell him the whole story, and he's just as confused as I am and claims to have no part in it. At this point, I'm just at a loss, and I'm also really freaked out that some strange man is going through that much trouble at 1 a.m. to look for me. If you have any insights or ideas of what this could be, then do let me know, because I have a feeling that something fishy is going on. So back in 2015, my sister and I are home alone watching Craigslist horror stories on YouTube. I know, it's pretty ironic. But for reference, I was 13 while my sister was 17, and having these watch parties had become something of a habit for us, as it was our last year together before she went off to college. We lived in a pretty safe neighborhood, and nothing had ever really happened at that point that would give us any reason to be anxious about being alone. But anyway, time goes on, and my sister suggests that we order a pizza since she was hungry. I'm not one to turn down a pizza, so I naturally agree, and we place an order at a local pizza place. We continue watching our videos for another 15 to 20 minutes before I step out to use the restroom. And just then, I hear the doorbell ring, followed by my sister getting up to go and answer it. So I carry on with my business with the assumption that it was just the pizza. I would say that maybe only 2 minutes had passed as I come back out and realize that my sister was still at the door talking with someone. I couldn't really make out what was being said, but I knew that it was definitely a man's voice responding to her. As I go to see what's going on, my sister promptly shuts the door, pizza in hand. I initially assumed maybe there was just an issue with the payment, so I just teased my sister for taking so long and go and sit down. I know. Who thought a 13-year-old boy could be such an oblivious person, right? It didn't take long, though, for me to realize, though, that my sister wasn't eating, despite this whole thing being her idea, and even more so, she had a very nervous look on her face now and wasn't speaking much. I asked her what was up, and she proceeds to tell me that when she opened the door to greet the pizza guy, he looked at her as if he was checking her out, and followed up by giving her the most unsettling smile that she'd ever seen. She was trying to get the pizza and go, as we'd already paid online, but the creep insisted on trying to make conversation with her. The man pretended to fumble around trying to get the pizza box out of his bag, all while asking very personal questions that he certainly had no business asking, like how old she was and if she was alone and stuff like this. Now, I admittedly thought that she was just messing with me at first. I mean, stuff like that can never actually happen to people that you know, right? Nevertheless, it still left me feeling a bit anxious. We tried to enjoy the food and move on, and I'd say about an hour or two later, we had finally calmed down about the whole thing. But right as we were getting ready to clean up and go back to our own rooms, there's a knock at the door, a very loud and aggressive one at that. We share the same nervous look and then hesitantly slip over to the window to see if we can get a look at whoever's knocking. Now, I hadn't seen the guy, but my sister immediately recognized him as the pizza guy from before. We were contemplating calling the police, but the guy had only knocked once or twice more before getting in his car and taking off way too fast down the road. Almost like he knew that if he continued, he was more than likely to go and end up in a lot of trouble. We made a round around the house though, making sure everything was locked up, and then waited for what felt like ages for our parents to finally get home. My sister told them about what happened, but our mum insisted that we were just being dramatic, that we had just made ourselves nervous because of the videos that we were watching. And while we both initially insisted on being serious, we eventually gave up and just tried to move on from the whole thing. We ordered from that place a few more times, but thankfully we never saw that same delivery man again. Nothing else ever really came out of that situation, but I can't help but think about what could have happened if that creep had just been a bit more persistent. What if he had kept trying to get into the house, or if we had accidentally left the door unlocked? I think that his intentions were pretty obvious, and I can only hope that his behavior has caught up with him, and that he's somewhere getting the help that he probably needs. When I was in 1st through 2nd grade, the neighbours at the end of the block, they terrorised my family, and their son terrorised our next door neighbours. The next door neighbours, they were a family that we were close with, and I'll start with that first. So Junior, the teenage psychopath, was friends with their son, who was the same age. My brother and I were always there playing with their daughter, who was my age. Our mums were close, and the mum was Maria, and she was very pretty. One day her son told us that he was going to kill Junior. Maria told my mum that Junior had apparently been peeping in her window, so she decided to film him to get evidence because she kept finding something white on her windows. She found out that Junior was playing with himself to her undressing. He would then wipe everything on her windows, and this was before our family had problems with his family. One day, my dad, an avid cyclist, noticed his very expensive bike was missing. He saw Junior riding it around the neighbourhood. He'd stolen it out of our garage, and my dad went to his father and told him to get his son to give his bike back. His father yelled at my dad and denied Junior stole anything. Luckily, he left the bike in their driveway, and my dad took it back and kept it in the basement after that. But a few days later, someone knocked on our back door, and my dad looked outside to see a plate of rice with a dead crow on it. He called the police, but since he didn't see who put it there, they didn't do anything. When we would go out, we would leave our bunny and guinea pig in their cage outside to get some fresh air, and my mum and brother and I were only out for a short period of time. My dad was in the basement. But when we got home, we went straight to our backyard that had a fence and big bushes in the back. Our kiddie pool had been out, and this is what we found. Our bunny had been drowned in the pool, and our guinea pig was thrown over the extremely high bushes into the valley. It was devastating for us at the time. Piglet, our guinea pig, was still alive, and my mum took her to the animal hospital. She had severe internal bleeding though, and her bones were broken, so she had to be put to sleep. But I just could not believe the cruelty. All over my dad confronting Junior's dad over the bike. So my mum went over to their house and confronted the father. He readily admitted doing it, saying that they were just animals. He apparently did it with a friend, and I can't remember how my parents figured that out, but I think Maria's mother saw them in our backyard or something. The police were called, but again, nothing happened. But that wasn't the end though. You see, one night, I woke up to my dog Wrinkles going crazy. She was sleeping on my bed. My bed was facing my windows. Then I heard knocking, and I also heard a male voice saying something about coming in. He also called me names, and I also heard some expletives, but I then saw Junior. I then ran into my parents' room crying hysterically, saying that somebody was trying to get into my room. My dad went outside and saw one of our patio chairs outside my very open window. He called the police. They searched outside my window and they saw shoe prints. The cops thought that there might be two people though because of how many shoe prints were on the ground. They went to the neighbor's house, but his mother said that Junior wasn't home. He was out with friends apparently. But I bet that they were in his house, but the police couldn't search it. I was traumatized afterwards, and my bed was moved so I couldn't see the windows. I was terrified to be at home though, especially at night. my parents bought lights that you can run along the entire house and around the patio to my window, but I still get afraid at night if the blinds are open. Nothing ever happened to Junior too because there was no evidence that it was him. Plus, someone in his family was a cop apparently, so there was that. It explains, though, why he wasn't sent to jail for what he did to Maria, who actually had caught it on camera. I also forgot to mention, too, that my mum was talking to his mum before any of this started, and his mum referred to her husband as the man. She hated him and joked about poisoning his food, and apparently he died of a heart attack shortly after Junior climbed in my window, apparently, and we've always thought that maybe she finally did follow through with that threat. So this is literally something that I thought that I would never share. I'm not a believer in ghosts by any means. I'm 26 years old and have lived my whole life without seeing anything paranormal whatsoever. However, myself and my wife have been experiencing some very weird things happen in our house. You see, 2 nights ago, my wife was asleep with our daughter in her room and I was in the master bedroom. I had gotten up at about 1:30 in the morning to get a late snack, and while I was in the kitchen, my wife came to the kitchen and asks me, "What, babe?" I was completely confused and said, "What do you mean?" Because apparently she had heard the doorknob move pretty hard, so hard that she thought that it was locked and I was trying to open it. She was annoyed, but I told her that I didn't do it at all. I was pretty sure that she was dreaming and just heard me opening cookies, so it was just whatever at that moment. But just a couple of hours ago, however, she was here with my sister-in-law in my daughter's room. Again, I was in the living room and cleaning, and she came out to see what I was doing. Apparently, they thought that I was playing a prank on them because the door handle had moved 3 times, and they both saw it moving. It took me at least 30 minutes to convince them that I didn't do it. My wife saw it happen again while we were all searching the house, and there is definitely nobody in there. This is recent, but there were 2 separate times months ago where my daughter's room had toys making noise non-stop for at least an hour straight. I was too afraid to turn it off, too afraid to even move because it was 2 in the morning, and I was alone in the living room, so that made no sense. I had to wake my wife up to come with me and pull the batteries out in the end, but like I said, I'm not a believer, but now I'm just not so sure anymore. I mean, I've looked at every reasonable explanation for the doorknob, but there's just no way that it could move by itself like that. So, what could this possibly be? When I was a kid, about roughly 9 years old, I'm 20 now, I used to sneak out at night and walk throughout my neighborhood sometimes. I was a weird kid. I used to watch a lot of scary stuff on YouTube and stuff like that, and I would spend my nights literally shaking out of fear, but that didn't stop me. My neighborhood is full of abandoned houses that were mostly left untouched after the war in 1995. I'm from Bosnia. I always wanted to explore them as a kid, but never could as I was a bit shy. And that meant that somebody seeing me exploring and giving me a weird look would always make me run, and I don't know why I was like this, but that's not important now. But there was this huge house that was always surrounded by really large grass that was taller than me even, and I really wanted to explore it. I had asked my mum a bunch of times to go with me, but she obviously declined and banned me from going. But one night, I grabbed my dad's flashlight from the closet, climbed through the window of my room like I had before many times, and this time I went to the house. It was midnight. I arrived quickly as it was only a few houses from mine. Seeing no cars, I ran through the tall grass and ended up seeing a boarded-up window. There was a tight gap that I managed to crawl through, and I entered the house, and to my surprise, the room that I was in had nothing in it, like literally nothing. Not even a beer bottle or a cigarette. The house had no real windows or doors, so I could hear a sort of hissing sound of the wind. I walked around for a bit and I realized that there was nothing really special about it, and that I probably should have just stayed in bed. But while I was walking around, I would stop sometimes because I could have sworn that I heard somebody else walking in there, like the walking of heavy boots on stone or something. I froze, thinking that there was somebody in the house with me. I stood frozen for 5 minutes, and when I could no longer hear the sound, I continued to the second floor. The first room that I saw on the second floor was the bathroom. It had a toilet broken in half and a bathtub filled with dirty water. On the floor of it, I spotted something metal. I continue walking and I see an attic, like a hole in the roof of the house leading somewhere. There was a ladder nearby, and as I went to get it, I saw something small, like really small, like sort of a lighter sprinting across the room. I stood there, and as a kid, of course, I started to cry a little bit. I can't really explain what I saw, but it didn't look like a bug or a rat, but more like a humanoid creature. As I started crying, I sprinted to the window as quickly as I could that I came through. Looking behind me, I could make out a silhouette as well, like a man holding something. I jumped for the gap, and while trying to get out, I heard a huge bang, like from a gunshot or something. I sprinted back to my house, and I went back in through the window, and I went to bed. I couldn't sleep for nights after that, and my mother eventually took me to a doctor. They said that nothing was wrong with me, and a few years later I decided to bring up this story with my mum. She laughed at me but told me something that really sent chills down my spine. So the story goes that in the war between the Serbs and the Bosniaks, that house was used by the Serbs as a slaughterhouse. It is estimated that over 200 Bosniaks were killed in that house. When my mum told me that, I just went to my room and could barely believe it. The metal thing that I had found in that house was probably a bullet shell. To this day, I don't know if there was actually somebody in that house, or perhaps if there was something paranormal going on, but in any case, I'm just glad that I got out of there when I did.